Welcome. Tonight, are you ready to witness a massive epic hidden behind the mists of time? Here on NightSleepWhisper, we are embarking on a continuous, 50-chapter journey. A tale of friendship and courage awaits you, stretching from the dark, damp mines of Oakhaven to the glowing celestial peaks of Valoria. Now, lean back, leave the outside world behind, and let my voice carry you into the heart of this ancient secret. Sleep well, and enjoy the journey. Elias stood at the edge of the dark forest. The wind was very cold and bit at his skin. He pulled his thick wool cloak closer to his body. Ahead of him, the village of Oakhaven sat in a thick blanket of grey mist. It was a lonely place on the edge of the cold sea. The road under his boots was hard and frozen. There was no sound of birds or animals. Only the wind moved the branches of the dead trees. Elias was a tall man with tired eyes. He was once a soldier for the king, but those days were over. Now, he carried only a small pack and a heavy sword at his belt. He was here for one reason. He was looking for his old friend, Julian. Julian was a blacksmith, a man of strong arms and a heavy hammer. They had fought in the wars together 10 years ago. 6 months ago, Julian's letters stopped coming. The last letter was short and strange. It said, "The iron is turning to shadow." Elias walked toward the main gate of the village. The gate was made of heavy, dark wood. It was closed. This was very strange for a village during the day. Usually, the gates were open for merchants, farmers, and travelers. Elias reached out and hit the wood with his closed hand. A loud, dull sound echoed through the quiet air. A small window in the gate opened. A man with a thin face looked out. He had a metal helmet on his head. His eyes were wide and he looked nervous. He was an adult, but he looked like he wanted to run away. "Who are you?" the man asked. His voice was low and shaky. "What do you want in Oakhaven?" "My name is Elias," the traveler replied. His voice was calm and strong. "I am a friend. I am looking for Julian the blacksmith. Is he here?" The man at the gate became very quiet. He looked to the left and then to the right. He did not open the gate immediately. "We do not see many strangers here," the man said. "The winter is hard. People should stay in their own homes. It is better for everyone. I have traveled for many days." Elias said, "I am tired and cold. I only want to find my friend and a place to sleep. I have coins to pay for my food." The man sighed. The gate opened slowly. Elias walked inside. The village was very quiet. The houses were made of grey stone and dark wood. Smoke rose from the chimneys, but no people were in the streets. Doors were locked. Windows were covered with heavy cloths. Elias looked at the guard. "Why is everyone hiding?" he asked. The guard shook his head. "It is the mist," he whispered. "The mist brings bad things. Go to the inn, Elias. It is the large building near the center. Do not talk to anyone on the street. And do not stay outside after the sun goes down." Elias felt a cold shiver. He looked at the dark houses. He felt many eyes watching him from behind the curtains. He was finally in Oakhaven, but he knew his journey was just beginning. Elias followed the smell of coal and burnt wood. The scent was familiar. It reminded him of old times when he and Julian sat by a campfire after a long day of travel. He walked past a row of stone houses with heavy doors. Every door was shut tight. The silence in the village was heavy, like a thick blanket. Finally, he saw a wooden sign hanging from a metal pole. The sign had a picture of an anvil and a hammer. This was the place. The forge was a large building made of grey stones. It stood near the edge of a small stream. The water in the stream was not moving because it was frozen into white ice. Elias stood in front of the heavy oak door. He felt a small hope in his heart. Perhaps Julian was just busy. Perhaps he did not hear the gate because of the noise of his work. Elias raised his hand and knocked 3 times. There was no answer. He waited for a minute. The only sound was the wind moving through the dry grass nearby. Elias reached for the iron handle and pushed. The door was not locked. It opened with a slow, low groan. Elias stepped inside. The air inside the forge was much warmer than the air outside. The smell of smoke was very strong here. In the center of the large room, there was a big stone hearth. Inside the hearth, the coals were still glowing with a soft red light. A small fire was alive. This was a clear sign. A blacksmith never leaves his fire alone if he is going away for a long time. "Julian!" Elias called out. His voice sounded very loud in the empty room. "Julian! It is Elias. Are you here?" Only the shadows moved on the walls. Elias walked deeper into the workshop. He saw many tools hanging on the walls. There were hammers of all sizes, long metal tongs, and heavy aprons made of thick leather. Everything was in its place. Julian was always a very organized man. Elias looked at the large anvil in the middle of the floor. A piece of iron sat on top of it. The iron was dark, but it was still giving off a little bit of heat. Julian was working on this piece of metal only a short time ago. Elias moved to the back of the workshop. There was a small wooden door that led to Julian's living area. He opened it and looked inside. The room was small and simple. There was a wooden bed, a table, and 1 chair. A piece of bread and a cup of water sat on the table. The bread was not hard yet. Julian had started his breakfast, but he did not finish it. Elias looked at the floor. He saw something strange near the bed. There were deep marks in the dust, like someone was pulled across the floor. Elias knelt down and touched the marks. His face became very serious. Julian did not walk out of this house. Something or someone took him. He stood up and looked around the room one more time. He needed to find a clue. He needed to know where his friend went. The warm fire in the forge now felt very cold to him. Elias knelt on the cold stone floor of the living room. The marks in the dust told a story of a struggle. Julian was a strong man, but something happened here that he could not stop. Elias moved his hand slowly over the floor. His fingers brushed against something hard and cold. It was near the leg of the wooden table. He picked it up. It was a small, round object. He walked back into the main forge area where the light from the small fire was better. He held the object close to the orange glow of the coals. It was a silver coin. Elias looked at the coin very carefully. He was a traveler and a former soldier, so he knew the money of many lands. This coin was different. It was not a coin from the king's city. It was not a coin from the merchant towns in the east. The silver was very bright and heavy. On one side, there was a picture of a crown with sharp points. On the other side, there was a picture of a mountain with a line through the middle. This is not local money. Elias whispered to himself. He rubbed the coin with his thumb. The edges were sharp, as if the coin was new. In this small, poor village of Oakhaven, people used copper or old, dirty silver. A bright, strange coin like this did not belong here. It belonged to someone with power and wealth. Perhaps it fell out of a pocket during the fight. Elias felt a cold wind enter the room. He looked up. The front door of the forge was still open. He stood up and put the strange silver coin into a small leather bag at his belt. He needed to keep it safe. It was his first real clue. He walked around the anvil one more time. He looked for blood or more signs of a fight, but he saw nothing else. Whoever took Julian was careful. They left the fire burning to make people think Julian was still there. They wanted time. Elias walked out of the forge and closed the heavy door. The mist in the street was thicker now. It was hard to see the houses across the road. He remembered the guard's words. He needed to find the inn. He needed to talk to people, even if they were afraid to speak. The village felt like a ghost town. Elias heard the sound of a distant bell. It was a slow, heavy sound that signaled the afternoon. The sun was hidden behind the grey clouds, but he knew the night was coming soon. He did not want to be on the streets of Oakhaven when the darkness arrived. He started walking toward the center of the village. He kept his hand near the sword at his belt. The silver coin in his pocket felt heavy. It was a symbol of a secret, and Elias was determined to find out what that secret was. Elias walked through the thick mist. He saw a large building with a sign that moved in the wind. The sign showed a fish and a cup. This was the village inn. A yellow light came from the windows, but the glass was dirty. Elias pushed the heavy door. It made a long, low sound as it opened. Inside, the air was warm and full of smoke. There was a large fireplace at the end of the room. A few men sat at round wooden tables. They wore simple clothes made of brown and grey wool. When Elias stepped inside, the room became perfectly quiet. Every man stopped talking. They all looked at the stranger with his long sword and his travel-worn cloak. Elias walked to the wooden bar. A woman with grey hair stood there. She was cleaning a wooden cup with a cloth. She looked at Elias with a tired face. "I need a room for the night," Elias said. He put a copper coin on the table. "And some hot food, if you have it." The woman took the coin. "I am Marta," she said. Her voice was dry. "We have a room upstairs. It is small, but the bed is clean. I have some vegetable soup and bread in the kitchen." "Thank you, Marta," Elias said. He sat down on a stool. He looked at the other men in the room. They quickly looked away. They began to talk again, but their voices were very low. They whispered to each other. "I am looking for a friend," Elias said. He spoke loudly so the others could hear. "His name is Julian. He is the blacksmith here. Do you know where he is?" Suddenly, a man at a nearby table dropped his spoon. It made a loud, metal sound on the floor. No one spoke. Marta stopped cleaning the cup. She looked at the floor and did not answer. "Julian is a good man," Elias continued. "I went to his forge today. The fire was burning, but he was not there. The house was a mess." Marta leaned closer to Elias. Her eyes were full of fear. "We do not talk about the blacksmith," she whispered. "It is not safe." "Why is it not safe?" Elias asked. "Is he in trouble?" A large man at the corner table stood up. He looked angry. "You are a stranger," the man said. "You ask too many questions. Julian is gone. That is all you need to know. Eat your soup and stay in your room." The man walked out of the inn. He slammed the door behind him. The sound was like a heavy hammer hitting a wall. The other men stayed silent. They finished their drinks quickly and left one by one. Soon, only Elias and Marta were in the room. "They are afraid, Elias," Marta said softly. "People disappear in Oakhaven. First it was the sheep. Then it was the travelers. Now, it is our own people. Do not go out at night. Lock your door." Elias felt the weight of the silver coin in his pocket. "I will not leave without my friend," he said. Marta placed a bowl of hot onion soup and a thick piece of brown bread in front of Elias. The steam from the soup smelled good, and Elias realized he was very hungry. He began to eat, but his mind was busy. He thought about Julian and the strange silver coin. He thought about the fear in the eyes of the village men. The heavy door of the inn opened again. A cold wind followed a tall man into the room. He wore a long coat made of dark blue wool and a hat with grey fur. His boots were expensive and made of black leather. He looked like a man with power. Marta bowed her head when she saw him. "Good evening, Mayor Silas," Marta said. Her voice was very quiet. The man did not look at her. He walked straight to Elias and sat down at the table across from him. Silas had a thin face and sharp, blue eyes. He looked at Elias's sword and then at his face. "You are the traveler who is asking about the blacksmith," Silas said. It was not a question. "I am the mayor of Oakhaven. I help the people here. I also keep the peace." Elias put his spoon down. "I am Elias. Julian is my friend. I want to know where he is. The people here are afraid to speak his name." The mayor smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. Julian was a good worker, but he was a restless man. He decided to leave our village 3 days ago. He wanted to find work in the big city. He left his forge and his tools because he wanted a new life. Elias knew this was a lie. Blacksmiths do not leave their fires burning and their food on the table if they are going on a long journey. They do not leave their heavy hammers behind. If he left, why is his sister Clara still here? And why did he not tell me in a letter? The mayor leaned forward. The light from the fireplace made long shadows on his face. "Listen to me, Elias. This is a small village. We have many problems. The winter is long, and the sea is dangerous. We do not need a soldier here to cause more trouble. You are looking for a man who is gone. I found a silver coin in his house," Elias said. He watched the mayor's face carefully. It had a crown on it. It was not a coin from this kingdom. For a small second, the mayor's hands shook. He quickly hid them under the table. His expression became very hard. "I do not care about coins. I care about the safety of Oakhaven. I am telling you now, as the mayor, leave this village. Go back to the south tomorrow morning. If you stay, I cannot protect you from the things that happen in the mist." Silas stood up. He did not wait for Elias to answer. He walked out of the inn and into the dark night. Elias sat alone in the quiet room. He did not believe the mayor. The warning did not feel like a warning for his safety. It felt like a threat. Elias waited in his small room at the inn. The walls were thin, and he could hear the wind moving the wooden boards of the roof. He did not sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the door. He waited until the lights in the village went out one by one. When the inn was finally silent, he stood up. He did not use a lamp. He wanted the darkness to hide him. He opened his window slowly. The cold air rushed into the room. The mist was even thicker now. It looked like a sea of white smoke. Elias climbed out of the window and dropped quietly to the ground. He moved like a ghost through the narrow streets. He avoided the main road where the mayor's guards might walk. He arrived at Julian's forge. The building looked like a giant, dark animal in the mist. The fire inside was dead now. The air was freezing. Elias entered and went straight to the small bedroom at the back. He needed to look closer. The mayor said Julian left for a new life, but Elias knew his friend. Julian never left a project unfinished. Elias knelt by the side of the simple wooden bed. He felt the cold floor with his hands. He pushed the heavy blankets to the floor. He ran his fingers along the wood of the bed frame. Then, he reached underneath. His hand touched something that was not dust or stone. It felt like dry paper. He pulled it out. It was a letter, folded many times. Elias walked to the window to use the faint light from the moon. The paper was old, and the writing was messy, like someone wrote it in a hurry. He recognized Julian's handwriting immediately. Elias. The letter began. "If you are reading this, I am in great danger. I found something in the old iron mines. It is not iron. It is something much older and very heavy. The mayor and the men in the blue coats are watching me. They want me to build a crown. They call it the Iron Crown, but they use the bright silver and the gold I found deep in the earth. I cannot say no to them. They have Clara. I must meet a man at the old ruins on the cliff tonight. If I do not return, look for the mark of the crown. Elias felt a cold weight in his chest. Julian did not leave. He was a prisoner. And Clara, Julian's sister, was also in danger. The men in blue coats were the soldiers Elias saw earlier. The silver coin in his pocket now had a meaning. It was part of the secret Julian found in the mines. Suddenly, Elias heard a sound outside the forge. It was the sound of heavy boots on the frozen ground. Someone was walking toward the door. Elias put the letter inside his shirt. He moved to the shadows behind the large anvil. He held the handle of his sword. He did not breathe. A light appeared under the door. Someone was looking for him. The light under the door of the forge moved away slowly. Elias heard the footsteps of the person outside. The sounds became quiet as the person walked back toward the center of the village. Elias did not move for a long time. He waited in the dark, listening to the wind. When he was sure he was alone, he climbed out of the small window at the back of the house. The letter in his shirt felt warm against his skin. It was a map of the truth. Julian was not a traveler. He was a prisoner of his own skill. Elias knew he had to go to the old ruins on the cliff. That was where Julian went for his meeting. He walked away from the village. The ground began to rise. The road turned into a narrow path made of dirt and small stones. To his left, there was a dark forest of pine trees. To his right, there was a long drop down to the cold sea. The waves hit the rocks below with a loud, rhythmic sound. The air here was very wet and smelled of salt. The mist was thinner on the cliff, but the moon was hidden behind the clouds. It was very hard to see the path. Elias moved slowly. He used his hands to touch the cold stones of the cliff wall. One wrong step would send him falling into the dark water. As he walked, Elias stopped. He stood perfectly still. He felt a strange sensation on the back of his neck. It was the feeling of eyes. Someone was watching him. He looked into the dark trees of the forest. The branches moved in the wind, but he saw no one. "Is someone there?" Elias asked. His voice was lost in the sound of the wind. There was no answer. He continued walking, but he kept his hand on the handle of his sword. Every few minutes, he heard a small sound behind him. It was the sound of a dry branch breaking or a stone moving. It was not the wind. Someone was following him, and they were very good at staying in the shadows. Elias thought about Julian's warning. The village was full of secrets. Perhaps the men in blue coats were not the only ones watching the path. He reached a part of the path where the trees were very close to the edge of the cliff. It was a perfect place for an attack. Elias did not run. He was a soldier, and he knew that running often led to a trap. Instead, he stopped and turned around quickly. He pulled his sword from its sheath. The metal made a soft, sliding sound. "I know you are there," Elias said loudly. "Show yourself." The forest was silent. The mist moved between the trees like a ghost. No one came out of the darkness. Elias waited for a minute. Then he put his sword back. He was close to the ruins now. He could see the broken stone walls of an old watchtower against the grey sky. He had to be careful. The person in the shadows was still there, waiting for the right moment. Elias reached the old watchtower at the top of the cliff. The roof was gone, and the stone walls were broken. He walked inside the ruins. The wind moved through the empty windows with a low, whistling sound. He looked at the ground using the faint light of the moon. He saw footprints in the soft dirt. They were fresh. Someone was here very recently, perhaps only minutes ago. But the tower was now empty. The person who followed him had vanished into the mist. Elias realized that staying on the cliff was dangerous. He decided to go back to the village. He needed to find someone he could trust, or at least someone who was not the mayor. He thought about the village church. In many villages, the priest was a man of peace who knew the secrets of the people. He walked back down the dangerous cliff path. The village of Oakhaven was still quiet, but a few lights burned in the windows of the small church near the inn. The church was a simple building made of grey stone with a tall wooden cross on top. Elias reached the heavy door and pushed it open. The air inside the church was warm. The smell of old wood and burnt candles was very strong. Many small candles flickered near the front. A man stood at the altar, his back to the door. He wore a long black robe. This was Father Thomas. He was an adult with thin hair and a tired face. He was moving a large book on the altar. "Good evening, Father," Elias said. The priest jumped and turned around quickly. He looked very nervous. "Oh, good evening, traveler. You surprised me. It is very late. Why are you not resting at the inn?" "I am looking for the truth, Father," Elias said. He walked closer to the altar. "I am looking for Julian the blacksmith. The mayor says he left the village, but I do not believe him. Did Julian come to see you before he went away?" Father Thomas shook his head. He did not look at Elias's eyes. "I do not know, my son. People come and go in this world. I stay here and pray for the village. I have been inside this church all day and all night. I do not see what happens in the streets." Elias looked down at the floor. The priest's black robe was clean, but his boots were not. The leather boots were covered in thick, dark, wet mud. There was a small piece of green seaweed stuck to the heel. It was the same salty mud from the cliff path. Elias had just walked through that same mud. It was fresh and was still dripping onto the clean stone floor of the church. "That is a lot of mud for a man who stayed inside," Elias said. His voice was very calm. The priest looked down at his feet. His face became very white. He quickly pulled his long robe down to hide his boots. I was in the garden earlier," he said. His voice was shaking. "The garden is very wet because of the mist. The church garden is full of grass and flowers, Father," Elias replied. "That mud is from the sea cliffs. I saw it there tonight. Why were you at the ruins?" The priest did not answer. He began to blow out the candles with a shaky hand. "It is late, Elias. I am tired. I must go to my room now. Please, leave the church. We can talk in the morning." Elias walked toward the door. He knew the priest was lying. Father Thomas was part of the secret, or he was very afraid of the people who were. Elias now had another clue. But the mystery of Oakhaven was growing darker with every step. Elias walked out of the church and into the freezing night. He did not go back to the inn. He knew the priest was hiding a secret, and he knew the mayor was watching him. If he went to his room, he would be a trapped bird. Instead, he moved toward the edge of the village where the houses ended and the dark forest began. The village of Oakhaven was like a graveyard. There were no lights in the windows now. The only movement was the white mist that rolled over the stone walls. Elias sat behind a large hay wagon near the forest path. He wrapped his cloak around his shoulders and waited. He wanted to see if anyone left the church or the mayor's house. For a long time, there was only the sound of the wind. Then, the air changed. A new sound broke the silence of the night. It was a sharp, clear sound of metal hitting metal. It was a rhythmic noise, like a heartbeat made of iron. Elias stood up. He knew that sound very well. It was the sound of a heavy hammer hitting an anvil. It was the sound of a blacksmith at work. But Julian's forge was empty and cold. This noise was coming from the dark forest, near the area of the old iron mines. Elias began to walk toward the sound. He moved quietly, stepping on the soft moss instead of the dry branches. The trees were tall and close together. The mist hung between the branches like wet curtains. The sound of the hammer became louder with every step. It was a steady noise. Each strike was heavy and slow. A normal blacksmith worked with a fast rhythm, but this sounded different. It sounded like someone was working on something very large and very thick. As he moved deeper into the woods, Elias saw a faint orange glow between the trees. It was not a campfire. It was the bright, hot light of a forge. He moved closer and hid behind a large pine tree. In a small clearing, there was an old stone building. It was a secondary workshop, hidden from the village. Two men in blue coats stood outside the door. They carried long spears and looked very serious. The orange light came from the open door of the building. Elias watched the guards. They were the same type of soldiers the mayor mentioned. They were not village guards. They were professional warriors. Inside the building, the hammer hit the metal again. The sound echoed across the clearing and moved through the trees. Elias felt a mix of hope and fear. Was Julian inside that building? Was he the one hitting the metal? Elias wanted to run forward, but he saw the spears of the guards. He was only one man, and he did not know how many more soldiers were inside. He stayed in the shadows and watched the orange light. He needed a plan to get past the guards. The mystery was no longer a story of a missing friend. It was becoming a secret operation hidden in the heart of the forest. Elias moved slowly around the edge of the clearing. He stayed in the deep shadows of the pine trees. The orange light from the hidden forge was bright, but it did not reach the tall grass where Elias was walking. The sound of the hammer hitting metal continued. It was a heavy, slow rhythm that filled the cold air. The two guards in blue coats stood near the door. They were talking in low voices, but Elias could not hear their words. He needed to get closer to the stone building, but the ground was open. He decided to move behind a large pile of cut wood at the edge of the forest. As Elias stepped forward, his boot hit something soft in the grass. He stopped immediately. He looked down and saw a dark shape. At first, he thought it was a fallen log or a sack of grain. He knelt down and pushed the long, wet grass away with his hands. His heart began to beat faster. It was a man. The man was lying on his back, and his eyes were open, looking at the grey sky. He was not moving. Elias reached out and touched the man's neck. The skin was cold. This man was dead. Elias looked at the man's clothes. He was not a villager from Oakhaven. He was not a simple blacksmith like Julian. The man wore a heavy coat made of dark blue silk and a vest of black velvet. There were silver buttons on his shirt. His hands were soft and clean, not the hands of a worker. This was a man of wealth and high status. Elias saw a dark mark on the man's chest. His expensive silk shirt was torn. It looked like he was killed with a single, fast strike from a small blade. There was no sword near him. He was a stranger in a strange place, and someone wanted him to stay quiet. Elias felt a cold shiver. Why was a wealthy man dead in the grass near a secret forge? He looked at the man's face again. He did not know him, but the man looked important. Perhaps he was the person Julian was supposed to meet at the ruins. Suddenly, the sound of the hammer stopped. The forest became perfectly quiet. Elias stayed very low in the grass. He heard the door of the stone building open. A third guard walked out. He held a lamp in his hand. The light moved across the clearing. "Did you hear something?" the new guard asked. His voice was loud and clear. "No," one of the other guards replied. "Only the wind and the trees." It is a lonely night. The guard with the lamp began to walk toward the edge of the clearing. The light moved closer and closer to the place where Elias was kneeling next to the dead man. Elias knew he had to move. If the guard saw the body, he would also see Elias. He stayed flat against the cold ground. He moved away from the body, crawling like a snake through the wet grass. He went back into the safety of the dark trees just as the light touched the spot where the stranger lay. He did not look back. He had to return to the village and find answers before the sun came up. Elias waited behind the tree. The guard's lamp was bright, but the man did not see the body in the tall, wet grass. The guard yawned and turned back. He walked to the stone house. A heavy sound of wood hitting wood followed as the door closed. The clearing was dark once more, except for the orange light coming from the cracks in the walls. Elias moved back to the dead man. He knew he was taking a risk, but he needed a real clue. He knelt in the dirt. He felt the man's cold arm. He pulled back the expensive blue sleeve of the silk shirt. The light from the moon was very weak, but it was enough. On the skin of the man's wrist, there was a dark mark. It was a small tattoo. The ink was deep blue, almost black. It was the shape of a crown. It had 5 sharp points. It looked exactly like the crown on the silver coin Elias found in Julian's forge. Elias touched the mark. The skin was smooth. This was not a mark of a criminal or a common worker. This was the mark of a secret group. He looked at the man's other hand. On one finger, there was a gold ring with a red stone. Inside the ring, there were small letters. They said V. The mark of the crown. Elias whispered. The wind moved through the trees, making a soft rustling sound. He searched the man's pockets quickly. He found a small piece of paper. The paper was dry because it was deep inside the velvet vest. It was a short note. It said, "The smith is ready. The gold is pure. We meet at the ruins when the moon is high. Bring the payment." This man was the buyer. He came to Oakhaven to pay for the iron crown Julian was making, but someone killed him before he could finish the deal. Why? If the mayor was part of the plan, why would he kill the man with the money? Or maybe there was someone else in the shadows. Elias heard the sound of the hammer again. The noise was steady and strong. Each hit felt like a warning. He put the note and the silver coin together in his bag. He had to leave this place now. He had to find Clara, Julian's sister. She lived in a small cottage near the village well. If Julian was in trouble, Clara was surely in danger too. Elias stood up and walked into the dark forest. He did not use the path. He moved through the bushes and the thick trees. He was a hunter now, looking for the truth in a village of lies. The mystery of the crown was growing, and the dead man was only the beginning. Elias walked through the thick mist to the village well. The air was very cold. He found the small stone cottage near the water. This was where Clara lived. Clara was Julian's older sister. She was a strong woman who worked with wool and cloth. Elias knew her from his many visits to Oakhaven in the past. The windows of the cottage were dark. Elias did not want to make a loud noise. He went to the wooden door and hit it gently 3 times. He waited. He heard a heavy chair moving on the floor inside. Then, a small voice spoke from behind the wood. "Who is there?" the voice asked. It was full of worry. "It is Elias." He whispered, "I am Julian's friend. Please, Clara, open the door." He heard a metal bolt sliding back. The door opened just a little bit. Clara looked out. Her face was pale and her eyes were red from crying. She saw Elias and quickly pulled him inside. She closed the door and locked it again. The room was small. A single candle burned on a wooden table. Clara was wearing a heavy grey dress and a thick shawl. She looked at Elias with hope. I heard you were in the village. She said. The mayor told everyone to stay away from you. He said you were a dangerous man. The mayor is lying. Clara. Elias said. He sat down at the table. I found a letter from Julian. I know he is in trouble. I also found a dead man in the forest. He had a crown tattoo on his arm. Clara sat across from him. She covered her face with her hands. It is all because of the secret project. She said softly. A few months ago, Julian found a new tunnel in the iron mines. He did not find iron. He found a bright, heavy metal. He thought it was silver, but it was much better. Elias leaned forward. And the mayor found out. Yes. Clara replied. The mayor and the men in blue coats. They are not local soldiers. They work for a powerful man from the south. They took Julian to a secret forge in the woods. They told him he must make a crown. They call it the Iron Crown to hide the truth, but it is made of the new metal and gold. Why a crown? Elias asked. The man from the south wants to be a king. Clara explained. He thinks that if he has a crown made from the ancient metal of the mountains, the people will follow him. Julian did not want to help them. He tried to say no. But the soldiers came to this house. They told him that if he did not work, they would hurt me. Elias felt a deep anger in his heart. His friend was a prisoner because of greed. I saw the forge. Clara. I heard the hammer. Julian is there. You must be careful. Elias. Clara said. She reached across the table and touched his arm. There are many guards. And the mayor has eyes everywhere. He is waiting for the crown to be finished. Once it is done, I don't think they will let Julian live. Elias stepped out of Clara's cottage. The night was very dark. The moon was now behind a thick wall of clouds. He did not go back to the inn. He knew that the mayor's men were probably waiting for him there. He walked toward the village well. The well was the heart of Oakhaven. It was a large circle of stones with a wooden roof and a long rope. The ground around the well was very muddy. People walked here every day to get water. Elias looked at the mud. He remembered the priest's boots. He looked for more footprints. He saw many different marks in the soft earth. Some were from boots, and some were from the wheels of heavy wagons. Something caught the light of the stars. It was a small, bright blue object in the dark mud. Elias knelt down. He picked it up and wiped the dirt away with his thumb. It was a piece of wax. In those times, people used wax to close important letters. This was a broken seal. The wax was a deep, royal blue color. It was very hard. Elias held it close to his eyes. On the wax, there was a picture of a falcon with its wings open. Below the falcon, there were 3 small stars. Elias recognized this symbol. It did not belong to the king. It belonged to the Duke of Valoria, a powerful lord from the southern lands. The Duke. Elias said quietly. Now he understood. The V on the dead man's ring stood for Valoria. The men in the blue coats were the Duke's personal soldiers. The Duke was famous for his wealth and his desire for more power. He was far away from his own lands. Why was he interested in a small village like Oakhaven? The answer was the Iron Crown. If the Duke had a crown made of the mysterious metal from the mines, he could claim he was a king. In the old stories, the first kings of the north wore crowns made of star metal. This metal was stronger than steel and glowed in the dark. If the Duke had such a crown, the people might believe he was chosen by the ancient laws. Elias felt a cold wind. The mystery was now a game of kings and lords. Julian was a small piece in a very large and dangerous puzzle. The Duke of Valoria was not a man who liked to lose. He was willing to kill to get what he wanted. Elias put the blue wax seal into his bag next to the silver coin. He had enough evidence now. He knew who was responsible. But he still did not know how to save Julian and Clara. He needed to find a way to stop the Duke's plan before the crown was finished. He heard a door open nearby. A yellow light hit the mud. Elias quickly moved behind the stone wall of the well. He watched as a guard walked past. The soldier was carrying a heavy lantern. Elias waited for the man to go away. He needed to move fast. The morning was coming, and with the light, his search would become much harder. Elias stayed very still behind the cold stones of the well. The village of Oakhaven was wrapped in a deep, wet silence. The mist moved around him like ghosts. Suddenly, he heard the sound of footsteps. They were light and quick. Two figures appeared from the shadows near the mayor's house. They were both adults. One was a man in a rough wool tunic, a common villager. The other was a tall man wearing a dark blue cloak. This was the color of the Duke's soldiers. They met near the center of the square. They did not speak loudly. They spoke in whispers that the wind almost carried away. Elias leaned forward to hear better. Elias watched them closely. The villager was holding a heavy leather bag. It looked very full. The man in the blue cloak took the bag. When he grabbed it, Elias heard the sound of many metal coins hitting each other inside the leather. "Is this all of it?" the soldier asked. His voice was sharp and cold. "It is every coin from the village chest," the villager replied. His voice was shaking with fear. "The mayor said the Duke needs it for the final materials. But the people will have nothing to eat this winter if we give this away." "The Duke does not care about your hunger," the soldier said. He pulled the strings of the bag tight. "He cares about the crown. Once the blacksmith finishes his work, Oakhaven will be famous. Or it will be a memory. Tell the mayor to keep the streets empty tomorrow. The Duke's messenger is coming at dawn." The villager bowed his head. He looked like a man who had lost all hope. He turned and walked back toward the stone houses. The soldier stayed for a moment. He looked around the square with a suspicious gaze. Elias pressed his back against the cold stone wall. He did not move. He did not even breathe. The soldier finally walked away toward the forest path. That was where the secret forge was hidden. Elias felt a cold anger in his chest. The mayor was stealing the village's money to pay for the Duke's secret crown. The people of Oakhaven were not just afraid. They were being robbed of their future. Julian was a prisoner, and the villagers were becoming poor because of one man's greed. He needed to see what was in that bag, but the soldier was moving fast. He had to make a choice. Should he follow the soldier to the forge, or should he find a way to get into the mayor's house to find more evidence? The moon appeared for a short moment between the dark clouds. Its light hit the muddy ground near the well. Elias saw a small, bright object in the dirt. He reached out and picked it up. It was a heavy, yellow coin. Gold. The village was paying in gold for a crown that would only bring them pain. Elias put the gold coin in his pocket. He knew he could not wait any longer. Elias watched the soldier disappear into the dark trees. He did not follow him yet. He remembered the priest, Father Thomas, and his muddy boots. The priest was hiding something inside the church. Elias walked back to the stone building. The lights in the windows were gone now, but Elias knew how to move in the dark. He entered the church through a small side door. It was very quiet inside. The air was cold and smelled of old paper and incense. Elias walked past the rows of wooden benches to the back of the church. There was a small door that led to the priest's private room. He pushed it gently. It was not locked. Inside, the room was simple. There was a small bed, a wooden desk, and many books. A single candle was burning low on the desk. Elias began to search. He did not want to steal, but he needed to find the truth to save Julian. He looked under the bed and behind the books. Nothing. Then, he noticed the rug on the floor. It was a heavy, grey rug made of wool. It was slightly moved to one side. Elias pushed the rug away with his boot. Underneath, one of the wooden floorboards looked different from the others. It was not nailed down. Elias used his small knife to lift the board. Under the floor, in a small hole, sat a wooden box. The box was made of dark oak and had heavy iron bands around it. It looked very old and very strong. Elias lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. He placed the box on the priest's desk. There was no normal keyhole. Instead, the top of the box had a strange design. It was a circle made of silver, and inside the circle, there were 3 empty shapes. One shape looked like a star, one like a moon, and one like a sun. A puzzle lock. Elias whispered. He tried to pull the lid, but it did not move. He searched the desk for a key or the silver shapes, but he found nothing. He realized the priest did not keep the key here. It was too dangerous. Suddenly, he heard a sound from the main part of the church. It was the sound of a heavy door closing and footsteps on the stone floor. Father Thomas was coming back. Elias did not have time to put the box back under the floor. He quickly looked around the room. There was a tall wooden wardrobe in the corner. Elias grabbed the box and jumped inside the wardrobe. He pulled the doors shut just as the priest entered the room. Through a small crack in the wood, Elias saw Father Thomas. The priest looked very tired. He sat at his desk and sighed. He did not look at the floor where the rug was moved. He put his head in his hands and started to pray in a low, shaky voice. Elias held the box tightly. He was trapped in the wardrobe with the secret, and the man who owned it was only a few steps away. Elias waited inside the dark wardrobe. He could hear the priest breathing. After a long time, the sounds of breathing changed. They became slow and heavy. Father Thomas had fallen asleep at his desk. Elias pushed the wooden door of the wardrobe very slowly. It did not make a sound. He stepped out into the room. The priest's head was resting on his arms. The candle was almost finished. Elias grabbed the heavy oak box and put it into his leather bag. He needed to find the 3 silver shapes to open it. He remembered a small building next to the church. It was the village library, a place where old records and books were kept. Elias left the church through the side door. The mist was still cold and wet. He walked to the library. The building was very old, with walls made of thick stone and a roof of dark tiles. The door was not locked because nobody in Oakhaven visited the library anymore. Most of the villagers were too busy working or too afraid to leave their homes. Inside, the library was full of the smell of dust and old paper. Thousands of books sat on wooden shelves. Elias did not have a lamp, but the moon was now visible through a high window. The silver light hit the center of the room. He began to look at the titles of the books. He was looking for something that talked about the stars or the sky. He walked past books about farming, books about the sea, and books about old wars. Finally, near the back of the room, he saw a very large book with a blue leather cover. The title was written in gold letters, "The Heavens Above." Elias pulled the book from the shelf. It was very light. This was strange because a book that size should be heavy. He placed it on a table and opened the cover. He realized it was not a real book. The pages inside were cut out to make a secret hole. Inside the hollow book, Elias found 3 small objects made of bright silver. One was a star with 5 points. One was a thin, curved moon. The third was a round sun with many small lines for light. They felt cold and heavy in his hand. They were the keys to the oak box. Elias took the box out of his bag. He carefully placed the silver star into the star-shaped hole on the lid. Then, he placed the moon and the sun into their spots. He heard a soft sound of moving metal from inside the box. The iron bands moved, and the lid opened just a little bit. His heart was beating fast. He opened the box completely. Inside, there were several pieces of paper and a small, heavy object wrapped in black cloth. He picked up the first paper. It was a map of the iron mines, but it showed a path that was not on any official maps. There were notes in the margins written by Father Thomas. "The Duke wants the star metal," the note said. "If the blacksmith finishes the crown, the ritual will begin. The king must not find out." Elias realized that the priest was not just afraid. He was helping the Duke, perhaps because he thought he had no choice. But the map was the most important thing. It showed exactly where the secret forge was located inside the mine system. Now, Elias knew where to go. Elias stared at the papers from the box. The most important paper was the map. It was old and yellow, but the drawings were very clear. It showed the village of Oakhaven from above. Below the village, there was a complex system of tunnels. Most of these were the old iron mines. People in the village thought the mines were empty and dangerous. They did not go there. However, the map showed something new. There were lines drawn in red ink. These lines went much deeper than the iron tunnels. They led to a large chamber deep under the center of the village. Next to this chamber, someone had written a single word, "Source." Elias looked at the map carefully. He saw that one of the red lines started right under the church. Another one started near the old well in the village square. This explained why the priest was so nervous. The church was sitting on top of a secret. Next, Elias picked up the small object wrapped in black cloth. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a piece of metal the size of a large nut. It was not iron, and it was not silver. It was a strange, dark grey color with small blue sparks that seemed to live inside the metal. When the moonlight hit it, the metal gave off a faint, cold glow. "The star metal," Elias whispered. He touched it. The metal was freezing cold, colder than the ice in the stream. It felt heavy, much heavier than gold. This was the material Julian was using to make the crown. It was rare and powerful. Elias understood why the Duke was willing to kill for it. A king with a crown of star metal would look like a god to the common people. Suddenly, Elias heard a sound outside the library. It was not the wind. It was the sound of voices and the light of many lanterns. He looked through the high window. A group of guards in blue coats was moving through the mist. They were coming toward the library and the church. "He must be here," a voice shouted. The mayor said the stranger did not return to the inn. Elias realized the mayor was finished waiting. He was hunting for Elias now. He quickly folded the map and put it inside his shirt. He put the piece of star metal into his bag. He could not stay in the library. If the guards found him with the box and the map, he would never reach Julian. He looked for an exit. The main door was too dangerous. He saw a small wooden door at the back of the library, used for moving heavy boxes of books. He ran to it and pushed. It was locked from the inside with a simple metal bar. He lifted the bar and stepped out into a narrow, dark alley. The air was full of the smell of the sea and the damp mist. He could hear the guards entering the library. He had to reach the entrance to the mines. The map showed an entrance near the old well. He moved through the shadows, keeping his back against the stone walls. The hunt was on, and the secrets of the earth were waiting for him. Elias moved through the dark streets like a cat. He knew the guards were searching the library, so he decided to return to the inn for a very short time. He needed his heavy travel pack. It contained extra rope and a small bottle of oil for his lamp. He also thought the inn might be a quiet place for a few minutes. The guards were busy at the church, and they did not expect him to go back to his room. He arrived at the back of the inn. He looked up at the small wooden window of his room. It was still open, just as he had left it. He climbed the stone wall with difficulty. His hands were cold. But he was strong. He pulled himself up and stepped onto the wooden floor of his room. The room was silent. The candle he left earlier was now a small puddle of cold wax. Elias did not light a new one. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the map from his shirt. He used the soft light of the moon to look at the lines one more time. The entrance to the mines near the well was hidden under an old wooden shed. He needed to be very careful. Suddenly, Elias froze. He heard a very small sound. It was not the wind, and it was not the sound of the sea. It was the sound of metal scratching against wood. The sound was coming from the window. Elias stood up quietly. He did not make a sound on the floorboards. He moved to the corner of the room, near a large wooden wardrobe. He pulled his sword from its sheath. The metal made a very soft, sliding sound. He watched the window. A dark shadow appeared. At first, it was just a hand reaching over the wooden edge. Then, a head appeared. The person was wearing a dark hood. The figure moved slowly and carefully, trying to be silent. The person climbed into the room and stood on the floor. The stranger was tall and thin. He held a small, sharp knife in his right hand. The stranger did not see Elias in the dark corner. He walked toward the bed. He raised the knife, ready to strike the blankets. "Stop right there," Elias said. His voice was low and very dangerous. The stranger jumped and turned around. He saw Elias standing in the shadows with his long sword. The man's eyes were wide with surprise. He did not run. Instead, he moved into a fighting position. "The mayor wants that map," the stranger said. His voice was a dry whisper. "Give it to me, and maybe you will live to see the sun. You are one of the Duke's men." Elias said, "The mayor is just a servant to you." The stranger did not answer. He moved forward with his knife. He was fast, but Elias was a trained soldier. Elias stepped to the side and used the flat part of his sword to hit the man's arm. The knife fell to the floor. Elias grabbed the man by his shirt and pushed him against the wall. "Who sent you? Was it the Duke?" The man smiled, but it was a smile of fear. "It does not matter. The soldiers are already coming. Look at the street." Elias looked out the window. Down below, he saw the orange glow of many lanterns. A group of 10 soldiers was walking toward the inn. They were moving fast. Elias realized his mistake. The inn was not a hiding place. It was a trap. The man on the floor did not move. Elias had hit him hard. He knew he did not have much time. He quickly grabbed his heavy travel pack from under the bed. He checked his bag to make sure the map, the silver coin, and the piece of star metal were safe. Everything was there. Below his window, the sound of many heavy boots filled the street. The light from the lanterns danced on the walls of the buildings. Elias heard a loud voice. It was the mayor. "Listen to me." The mayor shouted to the village. "A dangerous thief is in Oakhaven. He is a tall man with a sword. He stole from the church and the library. Do not help him. If you see him, tell the guards immediately." Elias felt a cold anger. The mayor was using the truth to tell a lie. He was turning the villagers against Elias. Now, even the good people of Oakhaven would be afraid of him. He was no longer a guest. He was a hunted man. The heavy front door of the inn opened. Elias heard the soldiers talking downstairs. Their voices were deep and full of authority. They were not asking for permission. They were moving chairs and opening doors. "Search the kitchen," a soldier commanded. "2 of you, come with me to the upper floor." Elias knew he could not go down the stairs. He looked at the window. The street below was full of soldiers. He could see their blue coats and the metal of their spears. But he also saw that the buildings in Oakhaven were built very close together. The roof of the tailor's shop was only a few feet away from the inn's window. He climbed onto the window ledge. The wind was strong and cold. It tried to push him back into the room. He looked at the dark, wet tiles of the next roof. They looked slippery. One mistake would lead to a fall onto the spears of the guards. Elias took a deep breath. He jumped. His boots hit the tiles. He slipped for a second, but he grabbed the edge of a wooden chimney. He stayed very still, pressing his body against the cold roof. Down in his room, he heard the door break open. The soldiers were inside. "He is gone," one soldier shouted. "But look, here is one of our men on the floor. The window is open." Another voice cried out, "He is on the roofs. Find him." Elias did not wait. He began to move across the roofs. He stayed low, like a shadow. He moved from the tailor's shop to the bakery. The mist helped him hide, but the light from the lanterns below made it difficult. He could hear the shouts of the men in the street. He reached the end of the row of buildings. Below him was the dark area near the village well. This was the place on the map. The old wooden shed was there, standing alone in the shadows. It was his only way out. He dropped down from the roof into a pile of hay and stayed quiet. The guards were close, but for now, the darkness was his friend. Elias stayed very still in the pile of hay. His heart was beating fast against his ribs. He could hear the soldiers calling to each other on the main road. Their lanterns made long, yellow lines of light that cut through the mist. He waited until the voices became quiet. He knew he only had a few minutes before they searched this corner of the village. He stood up and brushed the dry grass from his cloak. The wooden shed was small and looked very old. The wood was grey and rotting from the wet sea air. There was no lock on the door. Elias pushed it open and stepped inside. The air inside the shed was heavy with the smell of dust and old earth. It was very dark. Elias reached into his pack and found his small metal lamp. He poured a little bit of oil into it and used a flint to make a spark. A small, orange flame appeared. He held the lamp high to see the room. The shed was full of broken tools. There were rusted shovels, empty wooden barrels, and old ropes. Elias pulled the map from his shirt. He looked at the red lines again. The entrance was supposed to be here, in the center of the floor. He moved a heavy barrel to one side. Under the barrel, the floor was covered in thick dirt. Elias used a broken shovel to push the dirt away. After a few minutes of work, his shovel hit something hard. It was not stone, it was metal. He cleared more dirt and found a large iron ring. The ring was attached to a heavy wooden trapdoor. Elias grabbed the ring with both hands. He pulled with all his strength. The trapdoor was very heavy, but it began to move. It made a long, slow sound as it opened. A wave of cold, damp air hit his face. The smell was different here. It smelled like ancient stones and deep water. Elias held his lamp over the opening. He saw a set of narrow stone steps that went straight down into the darkness. There was no end to the steps. They simply disappeared into the black hole. The truth is down there. Elias whispered to himself. He knew that if he went down, there was no easy way back. If the guards found the shed, they could trap him underground. But he thought of Julian and the Iron Crown. He thought of the village's stolen gold. He could not turn back now. Elias stepped onto the first stone stair. It was slippery and wet. He closed the trapdoor above him. Now, the only light was the small flame of his lamp. The silence was total. He began to walk down, deeper and deeper into the earth. The walls were narrow and made of cold, rough rock. With every step, the air became colder. He was leaving the world of the sun and the mist behind. He was entering the world of the mines, where the Duke's secrets were hidden in the dark. Elias reached the bottom of the stone stairs. The air here was very heavy and thick. His small lamp was the only thing that pushed back the deep blackness of the mine. The walls were not smooth. They were made of rough, dark rock that looked like it wanted to press in on him. He held his lamp high and looked around. The tunnel was long and narrow. It went in 2 directions. Elias pulled out the map one more time. The red line indicated that he should go to the left, toward the area labeled Source. He started walking. His boots made a soft, rhythmic sound on the cold stone floor. As he walked, he began to hear something strange. It was a low, soft sound that moved through the tunnel. It did not sound like a person speaking, but it did not sound like the wind either. It was a rhythmic sound, like a very quiet chant or a series of long sighs. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves. "It is just the air," Elias whispered to himself. His own voice sounded thin and small in the great silence of the earth. "The tunnels are like a flute. The wind from the surface moves through them and makes noise." He tried to believe his own words, but the whispers felt different. They felt like they had a meaning he could not understand. He stopped and pressed his ear against the cold, damp rock. The sound was louder there. It was a vibration, a deep hum that lived inside the stone. He remembered what Julian wrote in his letter about the iron turning to shadow. Elias continued walking. The tunnel became wider, and the ceiling became higher. He saw old wooden beams that held up the roof. The wood was black and covered in white fungus. Suddenly, he stopped. He lowered his lamp to the ground. The floor of this tunnel was covered in a layer of fine, grey dust. In the middle of the dust, there were clear marks. They were footprints. They were not old and filled with dust. They were sharp and fresh. A group of at least 3 people had walked this way very recently. One set of footprints was very large. The person who made them was heavy. Another set was smaller and more elegant. Elias knelt down to look closer. He saw the mark of a metal heel on one of the prints. Common villagers did not have metal on their boots. These were the boots of soldiers, the Duke's men. Elias felt a cold shiver. He was not alone in the dark. The guards were not just above the ground. They were down here, protecting the secret of the crown. He blew out his lamp. He did not want the orange light to show his position. He waited for his eyes to get used to the darkness. In the total blackness, the whispering sounds became even clearer. They seemed to be coming from the direction of the footprints. Elias put his hand on the wall and began to move forward slowly. He used his sense of touch to guide him. He was a shadow moving through a world of shadows, following the path of the star metal. Elias moved forward in the total darkness. He kept his left hand on the rough stone wall. The wall was wet and very cold. He walked slowly, putting one foot in front of the other. He did not want to trip on a loose stone or fall into a hidden hole. The whispering sound in the walls was now a deep, low hum. It felt like the mountain was breathing. Suddenly, he saw a change. Far ahead, there was a very faint light. It was not the yellow light of a lamp or a torch. It was a pale, blue glow. It looked like the light of the moon on a winter night. Elias stopped. He watched the light for a long time. It did not move. It was coming from the rock itself. He moved toward the glow. The tunnel opened into a large, round chamber. The ceiling was very high. The walls were covered in strange, white crystals. But it was not the crystals that caught his eye. Between the dark rocks, there were long, thick lines of a bright, yellow metal. The blue glow from the star metal reflected off these yellow lines. Elias stepped closer. He touched one of the yellow lines with his finger. The metal was soft and heavy. Gold. He whispered. He was shocked. This was supposed to be an iron mine. The people of Oakhaven were poor. They struggled every day to find enough food to eat. They lived in small, cold houses. All the time, a mountain of gold was right under their feet. The Iron Crown was not just a name. It was a lie to keep the secret. The mayor and the duke told the villagers the mines were empty so they could take the gold for themselves. He looked at the ground near the wall. He saw a small piece of the yellow metal that had fallen from the rock. He picked it up. It was the size of a large bean, but it felt very heavy in his hand. This gold was pure and beautiful. He realized why the Duke of Valoria was here. He did not just want a crown. He wanted the wealth of the entire mountain to start a war. But there was something else. Near the gold, there were veins of the darker metal. This metal had the blue sparks. It was the star metal. The gold and the star metal lived together in the rock. The Duke needed the gold for money, but he needed the star metal for the crown of the new king. Elias heard a sound from a deeper tunnel. It was the sound of a heavy hammer hitting a stone. It was a rhythmic noise. Someone was mining the metal. He also heard the low voices of men. They sounded tired and angry. Elias put the small piece of gold in his pocket. He now understood the mystery of Oakhaven. The village was sitting on a fortune, and Julian was the prisoner who had to turn that fortune into a symbol of power. Elias moved toward the sound of the hammer, staying close to the golden walls. Elias moved away from the bright gold and entered a smaller, darker tunnel. The air here was dry and full of a fine, grey dust. The dust made it hard to breathe, and it tasted like metal. Elias pulled his wool cloak over his mouth and nose. He followed the sound of the hammer, but as he moved closer, the noise suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was even more frightening than the noise. He stopped and waited. He did not hear any voices or footsteps. He moved forward very slowly. The tunnel opened into a small chamber that looked like a workspace. There were several wooden buckets filled with grey rocks and a large stone table. On the table, there were some small chisels and a leather bag. Elias walked to a stone ledge at the back of the room. His eyes caught something familiar. Resting in the grey dust was a heavy tool. It was a large hammer with a thick wooden handle and a head made of dark, strong steel. Elias picked it up. He felt the weight of the hammer in his hands. He knew this tool. He had seen Julian use it 1,000 times in the village forge. Julian called it the breaker. It was his favorite tool because it was perfectly balanced and very strong. Julian never left this hammer behind. He cleaned the metal every night after work. Julian. Elias whispered. The hammer was now covered in a layer of the strange, grey dust. The wooden handle felt cold. Finding it here, abandoned on a stone ledge, was a very bad sign. It meant that Julian had to leave in a hurry, or someone took him away by force. Elias looked at the dust on the table. He touched it with his finger. It was not normal dirt from the mine. It was the dust that came from cutting the star metal. Julian had been working right here. He was trying to shape the hard, blue metal into the pieces of a crown. Elias looked around the room for more clues. He saw a small piece of bread on the floor. It was hard and dry. Next to the bread, there was a small scrap of cloth. It was blue silk. It was a piece of the Duke's men's uniform. He realized that Julian was not mining the metal alone. The soldiers were watching him every second. They were forcing him to work in this dark hole, far away from the sun. The whispering Elias heard earlier was likely the sound of Julian's tools working against the ancient rock. Elias held the hammer tightly. He did not put it back. He decided to take it with him. If he found Julian, his friend would need his tool. If he found the guards, Elias could use the hammer as a weapon. He felt a new energy. He was very close now. He could feel the heat of a fire somewhere ahead. The secret forge was not far. Elias left the small workshop and moved deeper into the tunnel. He held Julian's heavy hammer in one hand, and his small lamp in the other. The orange light from the lamp was weak, but it helped him see the ground. The floor was now very uneven. There were large cracks in the stone, and the air was getting colder. He felt a strange movement in the air. It was not a breeze. It was a vibration that he felt in his boots. He stopped and looked up at the ceiling. The rock above him was dark and wet. In some places, the old wooden beams were bent and broken. The mountain felt heavy above his head. Suddenly, a loud cracking sound echoed through the tunnel. It was the sound of stone breaking. Elias did not wait. He knew the mountain was moving. He began to run. A shower of small pebbles fell from the ceiling. They hit his shoulders and his head. Then, a much louder noise followed. A massive piece of rock broke away from the roof behind him. It hit the floor with a sound like a mountain falling. The ground shook so hard that Elias almost fell. "I have to get out," he shouted. He saw more rocks falling in front of him. A large stone, the size of a wagon, crashed down and blocked the path back to the gold chamber. Dust filled the air. It was thick and white. Elias could not see his own hands. He coughed and tried to cover his face with his cloak. He heard more rocks falling. The sound was constant and terrifying. The ceiling was coming down. He saw a small opening near the floor, just ahead of him. It was a narrow hole that led to a lower level of the mine. He did not have a choice. If he stayed in the tunnel, he would be buried under the stone. Elias jumped into the hole. He slid down a steep slope of dirt and loose stones. He moved fast, unable to stop himself. His lamp hit a rock and the flame went out. He was sliding in total darkness. Finally, his boots hit flat ground. He rolled across the floor and hit a wall. He lay still for a long time. Everything was quiet now. The sound of the falling rocks was distant and muffled. He was trapped. The way he came was now buried under tons of stone. Elias reached into his pocket and found his flint. He worked in the dark until a spark hit the oil in his lamp. The light returned. He was in a very large, deep chamber. This place was different from the tunnels above. The walls were smooth and covered in ancient carvings. The air was very old and smelled of salt and dry bone. He was much deeper in the earth now. He looked at the carvings on the wall. They showed people wearing crowns and holding stars. He realized he had found the true heart of the mountain. He was alone, and he was lost, but he was also closer to the secret than anyone else in Oakhaven. Elias stood up slowly. His body was sore from the fall, but he was alive. He held his lamp close to the walls of the deep chamber. The carvings showed a story from a long time ago. They showed people bowing to a leader who wore a bright, glowing crown. Elias realized that the Duke was trying to bring back a dead history. At the far end of the chamber, he saw a narrow opening in the rock. A warm, orange light was coming from inside. Elias smelled the familiar scent of coal and hot metal. He also felt a wave of heat. This was the heart of the operation. He blew out his lamp again and moved toward the light. He reached the opening and looked inside. The room was a massive natural cavern. In the center, there was a large forge made of black stone. A fire was burning inside, and it was much hotter and brighter than a normal blacksmith's fire. The flames were a strange mix of deep orange and bright blue. 2 men were working at the forge. One man was moving the bellows to keep the fire hot. The other man was an adult with a very focused face. He was not Julian. He was another smith, perhaps one of the Duke's own men. He was holding a pair of long iron tongs. On a stone table next to the forge, Elias saw the object of the mystery. It was a crown. It was not finished yet, but its beauty was terrifying. The base of the crown was made of heavy gold from the mines. Resting on the gold were sharp points of the dark star metal. The metal gave off a cold, blue light that fought against the orange glow of the fire. "Is it ready?" a voice asked. Elias looked toward the shadows. A man stepped into the light. He wore a long, expensive coat of dark blue velvet and a silver sword at his belt. He was not the mayor. He was an aristocrat, a man of high birth. This was surely a high officer of the Duke of Valoria. "The metal is very hard, my lord," the smith replied. His voice was tired. "It does not like the heat. We must work slowly, or the gold will melt and the star metal will break. The Duke arrives in 3 days," the Lord said. His voice was like ice. "He expects to wear this crown when he stands before the village. If it is not finished, you will stay in this mine forever." "Where is the other one?" "The local blacksmith. He is in the lower cell, my lord," the smith said. "He refused to work on the final pieces. He says the crown is cursed." The Lord laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. "He is a fool. The crown is not a curse. It is a key. It will open the doors of the great palace in the south. Keep working. I will go and speak with our guest." The Lord walked out of the cavern through a heavy wooden door. Elias stayed in the shadows, his heart racing. He now knew exactly where Julian was. He was in a cell nearby. The crown was almost finished, and the Duke was coming soon. Elias looked at the crown one more time. It looked like a crown of thorns and stars. It was a beautiful object made of stolen gold and dangerous secrets. He had to act fast. He had to rescue Julian before the Lord returned. Elias waited until the two smiths were busy with a large bucket of water. They poured the water onto a hot piece of metal, creating a massive cloud of white steam. The room filled with thick vapor. This was his chance. He moved quickly and quietly around the edge of the cavern. He reached the heavy wooden door the Lord had used. It was not locked. He slipped through and found himself in a long, narrow corridor. This part of the mine was different. The walls were reinforced with thick timber, and iron lamps hung from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows. He followed the sound of voices. The Lord's voice was easy to hear in the quiet tunnel. "You are being very stubborn, Julian," the Lord said. "A man of your skill should be happy to work on such a masterpiece. Why throw your life away for a village that has already forgotten you?" Elias reached a section where the corridor opened into small, damp rooms with iron bars. These were the cells. He hid behind a thick wooden pillar and looked toward the last cell. The Lord was standing there, looking through the bars. "The people of Oakhaven are my friends," a tired, raspy voice replied. It was Julian. "That crown is not a masterpiece. It is a weapon. I will not put the final stones in place. I will not help the Duke steal a kingdom." The Lord sighed, a sound of fake disappointment. "Very well. You have until the morning to change your mind. If the crown is not finished by dawn, we will bring your sister, Clara, down here. Perhaps she will be more helpful." Elias felt his blood turn to ice. They were going to use Clara to break Julian. The Lord turned and began walking back toward the forge. Elias pressed his body against the dark wood of the pillar, holding his breath. The Lord walked past, his expensive boots clicking on the stone. He didn't look back. Once the footsteps faded, Elias ran to the cell. "Julian," he whispered. A man moved from the shadows of the cell. He was thin, and his clothes were torn and covered in grey dust. His face was bruised, but when he saw Elias, his eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. "Elias!" Julian gasped. He grabbed the iron bars. How are you here?" "The village is crawling with the Duke's men. I followed the coins and the lies," Elias said. He reached into his pack and pulled out the heavy hammer. "I found the breaker. Julian, I think you might need it." Julian touched the cold steel of his favorite hammer through the bars. A small smile appeared on his face. "You always were good at finding things that were lost. But Elias, you must leave. The Duke is coming with a small army. You cannot fight them all." "I'm not leaving without you," Elias said firmly. He examined the lock on the cell door. It was a massive piece of iron, far too strong for a simple pick. "And I'm not leaving without that crown. If the Duke wants his star metal, he'll have to find it at the bottom of the sea." Elias looked at the lock. He didn't have the key, and the guards back at the forge would hear if he tried to smash the door. He needed a different plan, and he needed it before the sun rose over Oakhaven. Elias looked at the thick iron lock on Julian's cell. It was a heavy, cold piece of engineering. "Where is the key, Julian?" he whispered. The Lord didn't have it on his belt. Julian leaned his forehead against the bars. "The master of the forge has it. He is the giant of a man you saw working the bellows. He never lets it out of his sight. He believes the star metal is holy, and he treats the key to this cell like a sacred relic." Elias nodded. He looked back toward the orange glow of the forge. "I have to go back in there. Stay ready, Julian. When you hear the sound of the hammer hitting stone 3 times, get away from the bars." "Elias, wait." Julian grabbed his arm. "The star metal, it reacts to heat in strange ways. If you can knock a bucket of the cooling water into the forge, the steam will be thick enough to hide a mountain. Use the mist of the earth to your advantage." Elias squeezed Julian's hand and disappeared back into the shadows of the corridor. He moved toward the cavern, staying low. The heat was becoming intense again. As he reached the opening, he saw that the situation had changed. 2 more soldiers in blue coats had joined the smiths. They were standing near the stone table, guarding the unfinished crown. The master of the forge was a massive man with arms as thick as tree trunks. He was hunched over the anvil, his face glowing red from the fire. Hanging from a heavy leather cord around his neck was a large, brass key. It sat right against his chest, catching the blue light of the star metal. Elias looked at the large wooden bucket of water sitting near the forge. It was used for quenching the hot metal. It was heavy, but it was balanced on a small stone ledge. He didn't use his sword. He took the breaker, Julian's hammer, and gripped it with both hands. He didn't aim for the guards. He aimed for the support beam directly above the water bucket. With a silent prayer, Elias stepped into the light. Before the guards could even draw their breath to shout, he swung the hammer with the strength of a man who had traveled 1,000 miles for justice. The wooden beam snapped. The heavy bucket tipped forward, dumping gallons of ice-cold mine water directly into the white-hot coals of the forge. The reaction was immediate and violent. A massive explosion of white steam filled the cavern. It wasn't just a cloud. It was a wall of hot, blinding fog. The soldiers shouted in confusion, their voices muffled by the loud hissing of the dying fire. "I can't see." One cried out. "To the door. Protect the crown." Elias didn't go for the crown. He moved through the white mist like a predator. He remembered exactly where the master was standing. He felt the heat of the forge to his left and moved right. He bumped into a large, warm shape. The master of the forge let out a roar of anger, swinging a heavy iron rod blindly through the steam. Elias ducked. He reached out, his fingers finding the leather cord around the giant's neck. With one sharp tug of his dagger, the cord snapped. He had the key. Elias didn't stay to fight. He turned and ran back toward the corridor, the brass key cold and heavy in his palm. Behind him, the steam was starting to thin, and the angry shouts of the soldiers were getting closer. Elias sprinted through the dark corridor, his lungs burning from the sulphurous air and the heat of the forge. Behind him, the shouts of the guards echoed against the stone, growing louder as the steam in the cavern began to dissipate. He reached the iron bars of Julian's cell and jammed the brass key into the lock. The mechanism was old and stiff. Elias twisted the key with both hands, gritting his teeth. For a terrifying second, it didn't move. Then, the bolt slid back. Elias threw the door open. "Get up, Julian," Elias urged, reaching out a hand. Julian didn't need a second invitation. He stepped out of the shadows, his hands trembling as he took the breaker from Elias. As his fingers closed around the familiar wooden handle, the blacksmith seemed to stand a little taller. The weight of the hammer gave him back the strength the Duke's men had tried to steal. "The way back to the gold chamber is blocked by the cave-in," Elias whispered, checking the corridor. "And the forge is crawling with soldiers. Is there another way out of this level?" Julian wiped a layer of grey dust from his eyes. "There is an old ventilation shaft near the end of this hall. It was built 100 years ago to let the smoke out. It's a vertical climb, and the wood is probably rotten, but it leads to the sea cliffs above the village." "We take it," Elias said. Before they could move, a shadow fell across the corridor. The lord with the blue velvet coat appeared at the far end, followed by 3 soldiers with drawn swords. His face was no longer calm. It was twisted in a mask of pure rage. "Kill the traveler," the lord screamed, pointing his silver sword at Elias. "And bring the blacksmith to me alive. He still has work to finish." The soldiers charged. The corridor was narrow, which meant they couldn't surround Elias and Julian. Elias drew his own sword, the steel singing as it met the first soldier's blade. The sound of clashing metal filled the tunnel. Elias parried a thrust and stepped into the soldier's guard, hitting him hard with the hilt of his sword. The man went down, but the other 2 were right behind him. "Julian, the shaft. Go!" Elias shouted. "Not without a fight." Julian growled. The blacksmith swung the heavy hammer in a massive arc. It wasn't a sword, but it had the power of a falling mountain. The hammer hit the shield of the second soldier, shattering the wood and sending the man flying back against the stone wall. However, more guards were pouring out of the forge cavern. They were being hemmed in. Elias saw a pile of old mining supports, heavy wooden beams, stacked against the wall. "Julian, the supports. Drop them." Julian understood instantly. He swung the breaker one more time, not at a man, but at the single iron pin holding the stack of beams in place. With a thunderous roar, the heavy timbers collapsed, sliding across the corridor and creating a wooden wall between them and the Duke's men. "That won't hold them for long," Julian panted. "This way." They turned and ran toward the darkness at the end of the hall, where the air felt a little fresher and smelled of salt. The hunt was entering its final stage. Elias and Julian reached the end of the dark corridor. The air here was noticeably different. It was sharp, cold, and carried the heavy scent of the North Sea. In front of them stood a narrow vertical chimney cut directly into the mountain's heart. This was the ventilation shaft. An old iron ladder was bolted to the rock, but many of the rungs were missing or rusted thin. Every 10 feet, there was a small wooden platform, though the wood looked soft and dark from decades of dampness. "It's a long way up, Elias," Julian whispered, looking into the darkness above. "And the sea air has eaten the metal. If we fall, there's no coming back. We don't have a choice." Elias replied, glancing back. From behind the wooden barricade they had created, they heard the rhythmic thud of axes. The Duke's soldiers were already chopping through the timber. They didn't have minutes, they had seconds. "I'll go first," Elias said. He sheathed his sword and gripped the first iron rung. It groaned but held his weight. He climbed steadily, his muscles screaming from the exertion of the long night. Julian followed close behind, the heavy hammer strapped to his back. They moved in a tense rhythm. Elias would test a rung, then Julian would move up. When they reached the third platform, the wood gave a terrifying crack. Julian froze, his foot dangling over the abyss. Elias reached down and grabbed Julian's collar, hauling him up to a stable piece of stone just in time as the wooden planks tumbled into the darkness below. They didn't hear them hit the bottom for a long, echoing moment. "Don't look down," Elias commanded. Suddenly, a bright light appeared at the bottom of the shaft. The soldiers had broken through the barricade. "There they are!" A voice screamed from below. "Archers! Aim for the chimney! Get moving, Julian! Unless you want to be a pincushion for the Duke," Elias hissed. Arrows began to whistle up the shaft, clattering against the stone walls. Most fell short, but the soldiers were starting to climb after them. Elias looked up and saw a faint, silver circle of light far above. It was the moon. They climbed with desperate speed, ignoring the pain in their hands. The higher they went, the stronger the wind became. It whistled through the shaft, threatening to peel them off the ladder. Finally, Elias reached the top. He grabbed a jagged edge of rock and pulled himself out onto the wet grass of the sea cliff. He turned and reached back down, grabbing Julian's hand and pulling the blacksmith into the cold, midnight air. They lay on the grass, gasping for breath. Below them, the great sea crashed against the rocks. Behind them, the village of Oakhaven sat in the mist, looking like a toy town. But they weren't safe yet. The soldiers would know where this shaft led. "We need to find Clara," Julian panted, clutching his hammer. "And then we need to get to the harbor. It's the only way out." From the height of the sea cliffs, Oakhaven looked like a constellation of angry orange stars. Torches moved in lines through the streets, and Elias could hear the distant, faint sound of bells ringing. The village was no longer sleeping. The hunt had turned into a full-scale mobilization. "They're searching every house," Julian whispered, his voice trembling as he looked down at his home. "Elias, if they find Clara before we do, we won't let that happen," Elias said, his voice grounded and firm. He checked the edge of his sword. "The soldiers think we're still underground or heading for the main road south. They won't expect us to come down the Devil's Slide." The Devil's Slide was a treacherous, narrow goat path that wound down the face of the cliff directly toward the back of the village well. It was steep, slick with sea spray, and dropped away into the churning white foam of the ocean on one side. The descent plan. Objective: reach Clara's cottage at the edge of the village. The route: the Devil's Slide. The risk: high visibility if the moon breaks the clouds. One slip is fatal. The asset: Julian knows every stone of this path from his childhood. They moved with agonizing slowness. Elias kept his center of gravity low, his hand occasionally brushing against the freezing rock for balance. Above them, the wind howled like a wounded beast, masking the sound of their descent. Below, the harbor lights flickered, a few small fishing boats bobbed in the dark water, their masts swaying. When they finally reached the bottom, they were behind the stone wall of the village well. Elias peeked around the corner. 2 guards were standing near the tavern, their backs to the well. They were arguing about the cold. "Now," Elias signaled. They stayed in the deep shadows of the houses, moving toward Clara's small cottage. When they reached the door, Elias noticed it was slightly ajar. His heart sank. He pushed it open with the tip of his boot, sword ready. The room was a mess. Tables were overturned, and wool was scattered across the floor like fallen snow. But in the corner, hidden behind a heavy loom, a shadow moved. "Julian!" A voice sobbed. Clara stepped out, her face bruised but her eyes fierce. She was holding a heavy iron kitchen knife. When she saw her brother, she dropped the knife and threw her arms around him. "They came for me," she whispered into Julian's chest. "The mayor himself. I hid in the floorboards. They thought I ran for the woods." "We're leaving," Clara, Julian said, gripping her shoulders. Elias found a way. We go to the harbor. We take a boat and we don't look back until we see the southern lights. The harbor is guarded, Clara warned, pulling a dark cloak around her. The Duke's personal ship, the Blue Falcon, is anchored at the end of the pier. They've blocked the harbor mouth with a heavy chain. Elias looked at the silver coin in his hand, the one that started this whole mess. Then we don't just take a boat, he said, a grim, witty smile touching his lips. We take the Duke's pride. If we're going to be thieves, we might as well steal from the best. They stepped out into the mist, 3 shadows moving toward the sound of the tide. The final gamble had begun. The salt air was thick enough to taste as the trio reached the wooden docks. The rhythmic slap of the tide against the stone piers was the only sound besides their own hurried breathing. Ahead, the harbor was a maze of masts and rigging, but one ship stood out, the Blue Falcon. It was a sleek, 3-masted vessel with a hull painted the color of a midnight storm. There, Julian whispered, pointing toward a squat stone building at the very edge of the harbor mouth. The winch house. That's where the mechanism for the harbor chain is kept. If we don't drop it, we'll be trapped in the bay, and the Duke's archers will have all the time in the world to find us. Elias looked at the winch house. 2 guards stood outside the door, their spears held loosely as they watched the soldiers loading crates onto the Blue Falcon. They didn't expect trouble from the village side. They were looking out at the sea. Clara, stay behind these barrels, Elias commanded. Julian, I need your hammer. That winch is likely locked with a master bolt. My sword won't be enough to break it. I've spent my life breaking iron. Elias. Julian replied, his grip tightening on the breaker. Just get me to that door. They moved with practiced silence. Elias took the lead, using the shadows of the stacked cargo crates to mask their approach. When they were 10 feet from the guards, Elias signaled for Julian to wait. He picked up a loose stone and tossed it into the water on the opposite side of the pier. The guards turned, their spears leveling. What was that? A seal, one asked, stepping toward the edge. Elias didn't give them a second to find out. He lunged from the shadows, the flat of his blade striking the first guard across the helmet. The man crumpled without a sound. The second guard turned, but Julian was already there. He didn't use the hammer. It was too loud. Instead, he used his blacksmith strength to shove the man backward into the freezing harbor water. They reached the winch house door. It was locked from the inside. Julian, now. Elias hissed. Julian stepped forward. He didn't swing for the door itself. He aimed for the hinges. The stone around the hinges shattered. One more blow, and the heavy oak door fell inward with a groan. Inside, the room was dominated by a massive iron drum wrapped in links of chain the size of a man's head. A large iron lever held the drum in place. The release. Julian shouted. He threw his weight against the lever. It didn't budge. The mechanism was rusted and under immense tension from the weight of the chain. Together. Elias joined him, both men pulling with everything they had. With a scream of protesting metal, the lever snapped forward. The drum began to spin with a terrifying, mechanical roar. Outside, the massive harbor chain hit the water, sending a wall of spray into the air. The harbor was open, but the sound had alerted everyone. On the deck of the Blue Falcon, a horn began to blow, a long, low note that signaled the end of their secrecy. The sound of the chain hitting the water was still echoing in the bay when the first arrows hissed through the air. One thudded into the wooden door frame of the winch house, just inches from Elias's shoulder. The white mist was being torn apart by the orange glow of dozens of torches moving toward the pier. Clara. To the Lily. Elias roared, pointing toward the low-slung fishing boat bobbing 20 yards away. They ran. The wooden planks of the pier clattered under their boots, a hollow sound that seemed to draw the soldiers' attention. From the deck of the Blue Falcon, men were shouting orders. The Duke's ship was too large to maneuver quickly in the shallow harbor, but its archers had a clear line of sight. Suddenly, a group of 5 soldiers blocked the path to the boat. At their center stood the mayor of Oakhaven. He looked different now. The expensive fur hat was gone, and he held a heavy crossbow with trembling hands. His face was a mask of desperation. "You've ruined everything, Elias." The mayor screamed over the wind. That gold was the village's future. The Duke promised us safety. The Duke promised you a leash. Silas. Elias replied, not slowing his pace. "Now move, or I'll show you what a soldier does to a traitor." The mayor pulled the trigger. The bolt whizzed past Elias's ear, burying itself in a crate of salted fish. The dockside skirmish. Elias. Engaging the 3 soldiers on the left. His sword is a blur of silver in the torchlight. Julian. Using the breaker to keep the 2 on the right at bay. One swing shatters a soldier's spear like a dry twig. Clara. Navigating the crates, she grabs a heavy coil of rope and hurls it at the mayor's feet, tripping him just as he tries to reload. The fighting was frantic. Elias parried a sword thrust and stepped inside the guard's reach, throwing the man into the harbor. The splash was quickly lost to the waves. He could see more soldiers pouring out of the village tavern, their blue coats bright against the dark wood of the buildings. "We're running out of pier," Julian shouted, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They reached the Gilded Lily. Clara jumped onto the deck first, immediately grabbing a hatchet to hack at the thick mooring lines. Julian followed, his heavy frame making the small boat rock violently. Elias stood on the edge of the dock, his sword held low. He was the barrier between his friends and the approaching mob. The mayor had scrambled to his feet, screaming for the archers on the Blue Falcon to fire. "Don't just stand there, you fools. Kill them. If they escape with that metal, the Duke will hang us all." A volley of arrows rained down. Elias used a heavy wooden shield he'd snatched from a fallen soldier to protect himself, the arrows thudding into the wood with terrifying force. "Elias, the lines are cut. Jump!" Clara cried. The Gilded Lily began to drift away from the pier, pulled by the outgoing tide and the force of the harbor current. Elias took a 3-step run and leaped. He landed hard on the deck, the shield clattering away into the sea. Julian grabbed an oar and pushed off against the stone pilings with a roar of effort. The boat spun into the center of the channel. Behind them, the soldiers reached the edge of the dock, their torches reflecting in the water, but they had no way to follow. They were in the water, and the harbor mouth was open. But as Elias looked back, he saw the dark sails of the Blue Falcon beginning to unfurl. The Duke's ship was coming for them, and the open sea was a lonely place to hide. The Gilded Lily was a sturdy boat, built for the choppy, unpredictable waters of the North Sea, but she was no match for the raw speed of a warship. Behind them, the Blue Falcon looked like a predatory bird emerging from the mist. Its massive black sails caught the wind, and the sound of the water parting under its hull was a low, terrifying roar. "They're gaining on us," Clara shouted, her hands white-knuckled as she gripped the tiller. "If we stay in open water, they'll be on us before we clear the bay." Elias looked back. The Duke's ship was a wall of dark wood and bristling cannons. He could see the archers lining the deck, their bows drawn. "Julian, the star metal." Elias called out, "Does it truly glow in the dark?" Julian pulled the small, heavy nugget from Elias's bag. In the deep shadows of the sea, the metal didn't just glow, it pulsed. A faint, rhythmic blue light bled through Julian's fingers. "It reacts to the salt in the air, Elias. It's like it's waking up." "Good," Elias said, a sharp glint in his eyes. We're going to give them a ghost to hunt. Clara, steer for the broken shallows. Elias commanded, pointing toward a jagged field of rocks that rose from the water like the teeth of a giant. Julian, find a lantern, empty the oil, and put the star metal inside. We're going to tether it to a floating crate. It was a classic soldier's trick, adapted for the sea. They dropped the crate into the water, the blue light of the star metal shining through the lantern glass. To the archers on the Duke's ship, it looked exactly like a lamp on the deck of a small boat moving toward the main channel. Down! Elias hissed. Clara banked the gilded lily hard to the left, cutting into a narrow, fog-choked passage between two towering sea stacks. The sound of the waves crashing against the stone was deafening, a chaotic symphony of salt and spray. Behind them, the blue falcon didn't slow down. They saw the glow of the star metal and assumed the rebels were making a run for the open ocean. The sound was distant but unmistakable. The Duke's massive ship, blinded by the mist and focused on the false light, had found the edge of the shallows. The heavy wood of its hull groaned as it scraped against the submerged granite. They are stuck. Julian cheered, though he kept his voice low. Not stuck. Elias corrected, watching the warship's masts tilt dangerously. But delayed. They'll have to wait for the high tide to float free. By then, we'll be halfway to the southern ports. The gilded lily slipped through the last of the rocks and out into the deep, rolling swells of the great sea. The mist began to thin, and for the first time in days, the air felt clean. To the east, a thin line of grey light began to peel back the darkness of the horizon. Dawn was coming. Oakhaven was a silhouette behind them, a village of secrets finally left in the wake. We made it, Clara whispered, leaning her head against the mast. Elias looked at his friends. They were tired, bruised, and they had lost their home. But they had the map, the truth, and most importantly, each other. Elias reached into his pack and felt the weight of the silver coin. The mystery was solved, but the world was suddenly much larger than a small village in the mist. We made it to the sea, Elias said, looking toward the rising sun. Now, we just have to decide where the wind takes us. The gilded lily cut through the dark, rolling swells of the North Sea. Behind them, the flickering torches of Oakhaven had finally vanished, replaced by the vast, indifferent expanse of the horizon. The air was no longer thick with the suffocating mist of the village. Instead, it was sharp with salt and the promise of a freezing winter. Elias sat at the prow, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He watched the stars. For a soldier, the stars were more than beauty. They were a map. He looked for the Great Bear and the North Star, using them to ensure Clara kept the boat on a steady course toward the southern trade routes. The wind is holding, Clara said, her voice small against the rhythmic splashing of the waves. She was exhausted, her face pale under the moonlight, but her hands were steady on the tiller. If it stays this way, we might reach the islands of Valoria in 3 days. Julian sat in the middle of the boat, surrounded by the gear they had managed to scramble together. He was focused on the breaker. He used a piece of oily cloth to rub the salt spray from the hammer's head. He worked with a frantic energy, as if the repetitive motion could keep the memories of the dark mine at bay. Julian, Elias said softly, the hammer is clean. The blacksmith stopped, his shoulders dropping. He looked at the heavy tool, then at the small leather bag sitting between his feet. Inside that bag was the star metal nugget and the Duke's secret map. It's not just a piece of rock, Elias, Julian whispered. When I was in that forge, I felt it. The metal, it has a rhythm. It's like a heartbeat made of ice. Elias walked over and sat beside him. He opened the bag and looked at the nugget. Even without the heat of the forge, the blue sparks inside the metal seemed to move. They danced with a strange, cold intelligence. The Duke called it a key. Elias reminded him. He thinks it will open doors in the south. Do you think there's more of it down there? More than what you found in the tunnels? Julian nodded slowly. The vein I found was just a finger. Deep under Oakhaven, there is a hand. A whole arm of that metal. If the Duke builds his crown and connects it to the source on your map, he won't just be a king. He'll be something else. Something the world hasn't seen since the old kings fell. Elias looked back at the wake of the boat. He thought of the grounded blue falcon and the mayor's desperate eyes. They hadn't just escaped a village. They had stolen the seed of an empire. The southern lands were famous for their music, their wine, and their gold. But they were also a nest of vipers. As a traveler, Elias knew that in the south, the truth was often more dangerous than a blade. As the second night on the open sea began, the atmosphere aboard the Gilded Lily shifted. The moon was a thin silver sliver, providing little light, but the boat was far from dark. From inside the leather bag at Julian's feet, a rhythmic, azure glow began to pulse. It was timed perfectly with the rising and falling of the waves. "It's getting brighter," Clara noted, her eyes wide. She steered the boat with one hand, using the other to shield her eyes. "Elias, it's not just the metal. Look at the water." Elias leaned over the side of the boat. In the wake of the Gilded Lily, the sea was no longer black. Where the ship's hull disturbed the water, long streaks of bioluminescent blue appeared, matching the color of the star metal perfectly. It was as if the ocean itself was recognizing the presence of the ore. Julian reached into the bag and pulled out the nugget. He held it up, and the light grew so intense that it illuminated the faces of the three fugitives. "It's reacting to the depth," Julian realized. In the mine, it was dormant until we brought it near the forge. But out here, over the deep trenches of the sea, it's calling out. Suddenly, the star metal gave a sharp, vibrating hum. The wood of the boat began to tremble. Elias felt the vibration in his teeth. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a frequency. "Put it away, Julian," Elias commanded. Before Julian could drop the stone back into the bag, a massive shape moved beneath the boat. It was a dark shadow, 50 feet long, gliding through the glowing blue water just inches below the keel. The Gilded Lily rocked violently as the creature passed. "What was that?" Clara gasped, her voice jumping an octave. She fought to keep the boat from capsizing. "A predator of the deep," Elias said, his hand flying to his sword. He knew, however, that a sword would be useless against something that size. The metal isn't just a key for the Duke. It's a beacon for things that live in the dark. "Julian, the bag. Now." Julian shoved the nugget back into the leather pouch and wrapped it in a thick wool cloak. The blue light faded, and the sea returned to its natural, terrifying blackness. The vibration stopped, leaving only the sound of the wind and the panting of the three survivors. "We can't keep it," Julian said, his voice shaking. "If we bring this to a southern port, every monster, human or otherwise, will smell it from a mile away. We're carrying a curse. Elias. We can't throw it away either," Elias countered, looking at the map. "If it falls into the wrong hands at the bottom of the sea, who knows what it will draw to the surface? We keep it. We reach Valoria. We find the person the priest was writing to, the one who warned against the ritual." They sat in silence for the rest of the night, three small souls on a vast ocean, carrying a light that the world was not yet ready to see. The third morning brought a change in the weather. The sky was a bruised purple, and the wind had turned cold and biting, blowing in from the east. Elias stood at the stern, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon behind them. He had been doing this every hour since they left the broken shallows. "See anything?" Julian asked, handing Elias a piece of hard, dry bread. Elias took the bread but didn't look away from the horizon. Nothing yet. But the Blue Falcon wasn't the only ship in the Duke's fleet. He has cutters, small, fast ships designed for catching smugglers. They don't need a high tide to clear the rocks. As if his words had summoned a demon, a tiny white speck appeared on the line where the sea met the sky. It was so small it could have been a seagull's wing, but it didn't move like a bird. It stayed steady, growing larger with every passing minute. "Sail," Elias said, his voice flat. Julian stood up, squinting. "Just one. Maybe it's a merchant." "No merchant sails that fast into a headwind," Elias replied. "That's a Valoria cutter. They must have been patrolling the southern coast and doubled back when the Blue Falcon didn't check in. They'll be on us by sunset." "What do we do?" Clara asked, her voice tight with panic. "We can't outrun them in this boat. We're too heavy, and our sail is too small." Elias looked at the map, then at the star metal nugget. He looked at the jagged coastline of the Valerian Islands appearing to the west. "We don't outrun them," he said. "We outthink them." "Julian, those barrels of tar we found in the hold. Is there enough left to coat a piece of wood?" "Yes. But why?" "We're going to give them a fire to follow," Elias explained. "Clara, head for the spider's leg. Those rocks near the southern inlet. We're going to wait for the sun to go down, and then we're going to disappear." Elias knew the Duke's captains were trained in open water pursuit, but they were arrogant. They expected the fugitives to keep running south. He planned to double back into the very heart of the coastal reefs, a place where a heavy cutter couldn't follow. It was a soldier's gamble, using the terrain to turn a retreat into an ambush. The white speck on the horizon continued to grow, a silent reminder that their past was not yet finished with them. The sun dipped below the horizon, bleeding a deep crimson into the dark water. The Valoria cutter was now close enough that Elias could see the foam at its prow. It was a beautiful, deadly ship, built for speed and blood. Elias knew they had less than an hour of twilight before the world turned black. "Julian, the barrel," Elias called out. Julian had spent the afternoon preparing the decoy. They had taken a large wooden crate and coated it in thick, black tar. Inside, they placed a small lantern and several bundles of dry hemp soaked in fish oil. It was a crude torch, but in the distance and through the mist, it would look like the stern light of a fleeing boat. "Ready, Elias." Julian grunted, his face smeared with grease. "Just say the word." Clara steered the gilded lily toward the spider's leg. This was a cluster of jagged, needle-like rocks that jutted out of the sea at odd angles. The current here was treacherous, swirling in circles that could trap a ship's rudder. "Now," Elias commanded. Julian struck a flint, and the tar-coated crate erupted into a bright, orange flame. He shoved it overboard. The current caught the decoy immediately, pulling it toward the eastern side of the rocks, the side that led to the open ocean. "Turn," Elias hissed at Clara. Clara pulled the tiller hard. The gilded lily banked sharply, her hull groaning as they slipped into a narrow, dark passage between two massive stone pillars. Elias quickly blew out their own lamps. They were now in total darkness, moving by the sound of the water and the faint reflection of the stars on the wet stone. Behind them, they heard the Valoria cutter's horn. The sailors on the chase ship had seen the fire. They cheered, thinking their prey was finally within reach. The cutter shifted its sails, leaning into the wind as it pursued the flaming crate toward the deep water. "They're taking the bait," Clara whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. "Keep us moving," Elias said, his eyes scanning the narrow canal. "If we hit one of these legs, we'll sink in minutes." They spent the next 2 hours navigating the labyrinth of stone. The gilded lily was small enough to fit through gaps the cutter could never attempt. They moved like a ghost through a graveyard of ships. Every time the boat scraped against a rock, Elias felt his heart stop, but Clara's hands remained steady. When they finally emerged on the southern side of the Spider's Leg, the Valoria cutter was a distant spark on the horizon, still chasing a fire that was slowly burning out. The southern islands lay ahead, a dark smudge against the night sky. They had won their freedom, but the price was a night spent in the heart of the sea's most dangerous rocks. The Gilded Lily limped into a secluded inlet on the northern coast of Valoria, just as the first grey light of dawn touched the peaks of the island's volcanoes. The water here was as still as a mirror, reflecting the lush green ferns and ancient trees that grew right down to the shoreline. Elias jumped into the waist-deep water, his boots sinking into soft sand. He grabbed the mooring rope and hauled the boat toward a natural stone dock hidden beneath a canopy of hanging vines. Julian and Clara followed, their movements slow and heavy with exhaustion. "We need to hide the boat," Elias said, his voice a raspy whisper. "Julian, help me pull the camouflage nets over the mast." As they worked, Julian suddenly stopped. He was clutching the leather bag containing the star metal. His hands were shaking, and his skin looked unnaturally pale under the morning light. "Julian, what is it?" Clara asked, stepping toward him. It's heavier," Julian gasped. He slumped against the side of the boat. "The metal. It's not just pulsing anymore. It's pulling. It wants to go toward the center of the island." Elias took the bag from Julian's hand. He felt the weight immediately. It was as if the small nugget had tripled in mass overnight. He looked at the map. The red lines didn't stop at Oakhaven. They crossed the sea and ended at a location in the Valerian highlands marked with a symbol of an eye. This is what the priest was afraid of. Elias realized. The metal isn't just a resource. It's connected to something here. A secondary source, or perhaps the eye that watches over the veins. Suddenly, the silence of the inlet was broken by the sound of a bell. It wasn't the frantic alarm of Oakhaven. It was a rhythmic, peaceful chime. From a path hidden behind the trees, a woman appeared. She was tall, wearing robes of deep indigo, and her hair was white as snow, despite her youthful face. She held a silver staff topped with a crystal that hummed with a familiar blue light. "I have been waiting for the travelers from the north," she said. Her voice was like the sound of wind through dry leaves. "The star metal has been screaming in my dreams for 3 nights." Elias stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword, but not drawing it. "Who are you?" "I am Clara," she replied, her eyes fixing on the bag in Elias's hand. The one Father Thomas wrote to before his courage failed him. "You are in great danger, Elias of the North. The Duke is not the only one who wants that crown. The island itself is starting to wake up." Clara led them up a winding stone path that disappeared into the thick jungle. The air was warm and humid, a sharp contrast to the biting cold of the sea. Julian struggled to keep up, his eyes glazed and fixed on the bag Elias carried. The proximity to the star metal seemed to be draining his strength, or perhaps, Elias thought, it was forming a bridge between the man and the mountain. "Your friend is sensitive to the resonance," Clara said, glancing back at Julian. "He has spent too much time shaping the metal. He has the smith's mark on his soul now." They reached a hidden plateau where a stone tower stood, covered in flowering jasmine and strange, glowing moss. This was Clara's refuge, a library and laboratory built over a natural vent of volcanic heat. Inside, the walls were lined with thousands of scrolls and jars of shimmering alchemical liquids. "Sit," Clara commanded, pointing to a wooden table. She took the bag from Elias and placed it on a stone pedestal. The pedestal was carved with the same eye symbol from the map. As soon as the star metal touched the stone, the entire room brightened. The blue sparks inside the nugget flared, and a faint holographic image appeared in the air above it. It was a map of the world, but not one Elias recognized. It showed the continents as they were thousands of years ago, linked by veins of light. The Duke of Valoria thinks he is building a crown of power. Clara explained, her fingers tracing the glowing lines. But he is actually building a lightning rod. The star metal is not from this world. It is a remnant of the Great Fall. If the crown is completed and placed upon the source in the highlands, it will not make a king. It will create a rift. A rift to where? Clara asked, her voice trembling. To the place where the light is hungry. Clara replied grimly, the Duke is being manipulated. The whispering your friend heard in the mines. That wasn't the rock. It was the entities on the other side, guiding his hands to build the gate. Elias looked at Julian, who was staring at the holographic map with a look of terrifying recognition. Julian, did you know? When you were working on the crown, did you feel them? Julian nodded slowly. They told me the gold was just the skin. They wanted the bone. They wanted the star metal to be the teeth. Elias turned back to Clara. We have the nugget. We have the map. How do we stop it? We must reach the eye before the Duke's ritual begins. Clara said, her eyes turning to the window. In the distance, smoke was rising from the harbor of Syrinx, the main port of Valoria. But the Duke's men are already here. They didn't follow you across the sea, Elias. They were already waiting for you in the south. The news that the Duke's men were already in Valoria hit Elias like a physical blow. He had assumed their lead was significant, but the Duke of Valoria was a man of vast resources and many spies. Syrinx was a major hub. If his ships were docked there, it meant the local governors had likely been bought or bullied into silence. How many? Elias asked, his hand tightening on the back of a wooden chair. A small army. Clara replied, her gaze fixed on the rising smoke in the distance. They arrived 2 days ago under the guise of a diplomatic envoy. But they carry crates of iron and strange, muffled instruments. They are setting up a perimeter around the Great Rift in the Highlands. They call it the excavation, but we know better. Julian groaned, his head in his hands. The crown. They don't need me to finish it anymore. They have their own smiths now. They just needed the key, this piece of metal we're carrying. The piece you have is the heart of the mechanism. Clara said, turning back to the table. Without it, their crown is just a hollow shell. But they have the location, and they have the manpower. If they capture you, they will have everything they need to tear the sky open. We can't stay here. Elias said, looking at the stone walls of the tower. If they're in Syrinx, they'll have scouts in the jungle by noon. Clara, is there a way to the highlands that avoids the main roads? There is the Serpent's Path, she said, her voice dropping. It is a series of ancient tunnels that run through the volcanic vents. It is hot, dangerous, and the air is thin, but it will bring you directly to the eye without being seen from the sky. Clara stood up, her face determined. Then that's where we go. Julian needs a healer, and the world needs that rift to stay closed. Clara nodded. She reached into a hidden compartment in her desk and pulled out 3 small, silver vials. Drink these. They will protect your lungs from the sulfur and the heat. We must move before the sun reaches its zenith. The Duke's hounds are already catching the scent of the star metal. Elias looked at his companions. They were a broken blacksmith, a weaver, a scholar, and a tired soldier. Against them was the power of a kingdom and a cosmic hunger. He felt the weight of the silver coin in his pocket, the one he'd kept since Oakhaven. It felt cold, a stark reminder that every journey has a price. The entrance to the Serpent's Path was hidden behind a waterfall of boiling mineral water. The steam was so thick it felt like walking through a wet blanket. As they stepped behind the veil of water, the temperature jumped 20 degrees. Elias felt the sweat immediately soaking his shirt. "Keep the vials close," Clara warned, her staff glowing with a protective soft light. "The gas here can steal your senses before you even realize you're breathing it." The tunnels were smooth and obsidian black, formed by ancient lava flows. Unlike the mines of Oakhaven, which felt heavy and oppressive, these tunnels felt alive. The walls hummed with a low-frequency vibration, and veins of glowing red magma flickered behind thin sheets of translucent rock. Julian walked with a strange, jerky rhythm. He was no longer carrying the star metal. Elias had strapped it to his own back, but the proximity was still affecting him. "Do you hear that, Elias?" Julian whispered, stopping to press his ear against the black glass wall. "I hear the lava, Julian. Nothing else." "No, it's a song," Julian murmured. "A chorus. Thousands of voices, all singing the same note. They're waiting for the door to open. They're so hungry." Elias grabbed Julian's shoulder and shook him gently. "Stay with me, Julian. Don't listen to the stone. Focus on the sound of my boots." They continued deeper into the earth. The path began to climb steeply. In some places, they had to crawl through narrow fissures where the heat was almost unbearable. Clara struggled the most, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps despite the alchemical protection. "Just a little further," Clara encouraged. "We are crossing under the Valley of Ash. Above us, the Duke's men are marching, but here, we are ghosts in the veins of the world." Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a massive cavern. It was filled with giant crystals that reflected the red light of the magma below, creating a hellish, beautiful landscape. But in the center of the cavern, something was wrong. A group of men in dark grey armor, mercenaries Elias didn't recognize, were standing over a dead creature. "Scouts," Elias whispered, drawing his sword. The Duke didn't just buy the governor, he hired the Shadow Walkers. The mercenaries turned, their eyes glowing with a faint, unnatural green light. They didn't shout, they simply drew their curved blades and began to move with a fluid, terrifying speed. The Serpent's Path was no longer a secret. The Shadow Walkers didn't fight like regular soldiers. They moved in a blur of grey cloaks and silent footsteps, their blades coated in a dark, numbing poison. Elias stepped in front of Clara and Clara, his sword raised in a defensive arc. "Julian, stay back," Elias commanded. The first mercenary lunged. Elias parried the strike, but the force of it nearly numbed his arm. These weren't mere men, they were augmented by something dark, perhaps even a lesser form of the star metal's influence. Elias spun, catching the second attacker with a low kick, but the man didn't even flinch. "They don't feel pain, Elias," Clara shouted. She raised her staff, and a burst of brilliant white light filled the cavern. The mercenaries hissed and covered their eyes. The light was anathema to their dark-adapted senses. Seizing the moment, Elias drove his blade through the gap in the leader's armor. The man fell, but instead of blood, a thick, black smoke poured from the wound. "They are constructs," Elias realized. The Duke's smiths didn't just make a crown, they've been making soldiers. Julian, seeing his friend in danger, found a sudden burst of clarity. He unslung the breaker and charged the remaining 3 mercenaries. "You want the metal?" he roared, swinging the heavy hammer in a terrifying circle. "Then take the weight of it." The hammer hit the second construct with the force of a falling star. The mercenary was crushed against a giant crystal, the glass shattering into 1,000 razor-sharp shards. The remaining 2 Shadow Walkers retreated into the shadows of the crystals, realizing their prey was more dangerous than expected. "We have to move," Clara said, her light beginning to dim. "The death of these constructs will alert their master, the scholar who serves the Duke. He will know we are in the tunnels." "Who is this scholar?" Elias asked, wiping black soot from his blade. "A man who was once my student," Clara said, her voice filled with a deep sadness. "His name is Malika. He believes that by opening the rift, he can transcend the limits of the human mind. He is the one who designed the crown. He is the one who whispered to Julian in the dark." They didn't stay to count the dead. They climbed upward, the heat of the lava replaced by a cold, unnatural wind blowing down from the highlands. They were nearing the eye, and the final battle for the soul of the world was drawing closer with every step. As they emerged from the Serpent's Path, the stifling heat of the volcanic tunnels was instantly replaced by a biting, high-altitude wind. They stood on the rim of a massive caldera, a desolate landscape of grey ash and jagged obsidian spires. Above them, the sky was not the deep blue of a typical afternoon. It was a bruised, swirling violet, the clouds rotating slowly around a central point directly above the center of the island. "The eye," Clara whispered, pointing toward the center of the caldera. There, rising from the ash like a jagged needle, was a structure made of the same dark star metal they had seen in the mines. It was a triangular pylon, hundreds of feet high, humming with a frequency that vibrated the very bones of the earth. Around its base, Elias could see the white tents of the Duke's army and the flickering blue glow of portable forges. "They've already set the foundation," Elias noted, pulling his cloak tight against the wind. "Look at the perimeter. They have swivel guns and archers every 50 paces. We can't just charge in," Clara said, her teeth chattering. "We're 4 people against a battalion. We don't need to fight the whole army," Clara said. She reached into her robes and pulled out a small, glass sphere filled with a swirling silver mist. "This is a concentrated essence of the volcanic vents. If we can get close enough to the main forge, I can use this to create a thermal overload. The resulting explosion won't destroy the pylon, but it will disrupt the alignment long enough for us to reach the inner chamber." Julian, who had been unusually quiet, looked at the star metal nugget in Elias's pack. "They're missing the heart," he murmured. "They're trying to jumpstart the pylon with inferior ore. That's why the sky looks like a bruise. It's an unstable connection." Elias looked at his friend. Julian's eyes were no longer clouded. They were sharp with a sudden, technical clarity. "If we put the true metal in at the wrong moment, what happens?" "The feedback would be catastrophic," Julian replied. "It wouldn't just stop the ritual. It would shatter the star metal's physical form. It would turn the key into a lock that can never be opened again." "Then that's the plan," Elias decided. "We move through the spires. Clara, you and Clara handle the distraction. Julian and I are going to the heart of that machine." They moved like ghosts through the obsidian spires, the jagged rock providing just enough cover to evade the Duke's patrols. The air grew thinner and colder as they approached the base of the pylon. The sound of the star metal's hum was now a deafening throb, a physical weight that made every step a struggle. "Stay low," Elias signaled. They reached the edge of the camp. Ahead, a massive stone platform had been constructed around the base of the pylon. In the center of the platform sat a great iron chair, the throne for the Duke's new kingdom. Hovering above the throne was the Iron Crown, suspended in a field of magnetic blue energy. It was complete, save for the central socket where the star metal nugget belonged. A man stood on the platform, his back to them. He wore robes of charcoal gray and carried a staff that mirrored Ilara's, though his was topped with a shard of the dark metal. "Malika," Clara whispered, her grip tightening on her silver staff. The scholar turned as if he had heard her. His face was gaunt, his eyes replaced by 2 glowing blue orbs that leaked faint trails of smoke. He smiled, a thin, cruel expression that didn't reach his hollow eyes. "Teacher." Malika's voice projected across the flats, amplified by the pylon. "You are late." The alignment is nearly perfect. The great hunger is pressing against the veil, and I have prepared a seat for our new master. You are a fool, Malika. Elias stepped out from behind the spire, her staff shining with a defiant white light. You are not opening a door to knowledge. You are inviting a parasite into our world. Knowledge is a parasite. Malika laughed. It consumes the host to create something better. Now, give me the heart, or I shall have my constructs tear it from your traveler's cold fingers. From the shadows of the tents, a dozen shadow walkers emerged, their blades gleaming with green poison. At the same time, the Duke's archers on the perimeter raised their bows. Now, Ilara! Elias shouted. Ilara smashed the glass sphere against the obsidian ground. A pillar of white-hot steam and silver mist erupted, expanding with the force of a volcanic burst. The camp was instantly swallowed in a blinding fog. Screams of confusion rose from the soldiers, and the sound of iron clashing against stone echoed through the caldera. Julian, move! Elias grabbed the blacksmith's arm, and together they sprinted toward the platform, the star metal in Elias's pack pulsing with a frantic, desperate light. Elias and Julian scrambled up the stone steps of the platform, the heat from the forges below making the air shimmer. Above them, the iron crown spun faster and faster, the blue energy around it beginning to crackle like a localized thunderstorm. The violet sky above the pylon started to spiral into a funnel, a dark hole opening in the center of the clouds. It's starting! Julian yelled over the roar of the wind. Malika was waiting for them. He stood between them and the magnetic field holding the crown. He raised his staff, and a bolt of dark blue lightning struck the ground at Elias's feet, shattering the stone. The metal soldier! Malika demanded, his voice distorted and deep. Give it to me, and I will let your friends live to see the new world. Elias didn't answer. He drew his sword, but the metal of his blade began to glow cherry-red in the presence of the star metal's power. He had to drop it, the weapon clattering onto the platform. He was unarmed against a sorcerer. I don't need a sword for you. Elias growled. He lunged forward, tackling Malika around the waist. They tumbled across the platform, dangerously close to the edge of the magnetic field. Malika's skin felt like cold marble, and his strength was unnatural. He gripped Elias's throat, his blue eyes burning with a freezing fire. You are a pebble in the path of a mountain. Malika hissed. Suddenly, Julian had bypassed the fight and reached the control mechanism for the magnetic field. He wasn't using a key or a lever. He was using the breaker. With one massive swing, he smashed the cooling pipes that regulated the energy. The magnetic field flickered and died. The iron crown dropped, clattering onto the stone throne. The funnel in the sky stalled, the dark hole pulsing with a sound like a heartbeat. No! Malika screamed, releasing Elias. He scrambled toward the crown, but Elias was faster. He reached into his pack and pulled out the star metal nugget. The blue sparks inside were no longer dancing. They were screaming. Julian! Is it time? Elias called out, holding the nugget over the central socket of the crown. Wait for the next pulse. Julian cried, his hands gripped white on the handle of his hammer. If you put it in now, the rift will stabilize. You have to wait for the vacuum. The sky groaned. The dark hole in the clouds expanded, and a cold, black liquid began to drip from the edges of the rift, defying gravity as it rose toward the crown. The great hunger was reaching through. The platform shook as if the island itself were trying to vomit the pylon into the sky. The dark, oily liquid dripping from the rift began to coalesce into shapes, shadowy, elongated limbs that reached for the iron crown. The air smelled of ozone and ancient dust. Elias felt the star metal nugget in his hand vibrating so violently it threatened to shatter his bones. The pulse is coming. Julian screamed, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. He was braced against the iron throne, his eyes fixed on the darkening sky. Malika scrambled to his feet, his blue eyes flaring with madness. You cannot stop the inevitable. The cycle must complete. He lunged for Elias, but a sudden surge of blue energy from the crown threw him backward. The crown was rejecting him. It was no longer a tool of his making, but a conduit for something far more ancient. Elias saw the sky contract. The violet clouds pulled inward, and for a split second, the roar of the wind stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. This was the vacuum Julian had warned about, the moment the rift gasped for air before the final surge. Now, Elias. Insert it now. Elias didn't hesitate. He slammed the star metal nugget into the central socket of the iron crown. The fit was perfect. For a heartbeat, the blue sparks from the nugget and the black liquid from the rift met. There was a sound like 1,000 glass bells shattering at once. A blinding pillar of pure, white light erupted from the crown, shooting straight up into the center of the rift. The effect was not a stabilization, but a rejection. The white light acted as a wedge, forcing the edges of the dark hole apart. The great hunger let out a psychic shriek that sent Elias to his knees. The shadows that had been reaching for the crown were instantly vaporized. It's working. Clara's voice drifted up from the base of the platform. She and Clara were fighting off the remaining shadow walkers, who were dissolving into smoke as their source of power was disrupted. But the pylon was not designed for such feedback. The star metal structure began to glow white-hot. Deep cracks appeared in the obsidian steps. The energy had nowhere to go but back into the earth. We have to go. The whole caldera is going to blow. Elias shouted, grabbing Julian by the collar. The pylon was vibrating at a frequency that turned the surrounding ash into a liquid slurry. Malika was still on the platform, crawling toward the glowing crown. His robes were smoldering, and his glowing eyes were dimming. He reached out a hand, his fingers inches from the white-hot metal. It's beautiful. He whispered. Leave him, Elias. He's gone. Julian pulled at Elias's arm. They scrambled down the crumbling steps just as a massive explosion of energy rippled outward from the crown. The shockwave knocked them flat, tumbling them into the ash. When Elias looked back, the top of the pylon had vanished. The crown was gone, and Malika with it. Instead of a rift, a massive crystalline shell was forming over the base of the pylon. The star metal was literally locking itself, turning from a conductor into an impenetrable cage. It was sacrificing its form to seal the hole in the sky. Clara. Elias called out through the settling dust. The two women emerged from the haze of the cooling steam. Ilara's staff was cracked, and Clara was covered in grey soot. But they were alive. The Duke's army was in full retreat, their formations broken by the supernatural storm and the shifting ground. Is it over? Clara asked, looking up at the sky. The violet clouds were dissipating, revealing the first true stars Elias had seen since they arrived on the island. The gate is closed, Clara said, her voice heavy with fatigue. But the cost was high. The star metal has returned to the deep. It will not wake again in our lifetime. Julian sat on a piece of obsidian, his hands empty. He had lost the breaker in the chaos of the collapse. He looked at his calloused palms, then at the smoking ruin of the pylon. I'm a blacksmith without a hammer, he said with a hollow laugh. You're a man who saved a world, Julian. Elias said, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. We can find you a new hammer, but we need to move. The governor's men will be looking for someone to blame for this disaster. They traveled under the cover of the new moon, moving away from the caldera and toward the southern coast of Valoria. The island was quiet now. The whispering in the stone had stopped, replaced by the natural sounds of the jungle. the chirping of insects and the distant call of night birds. They reached a small fishing village 3 days later. It was a humble place, far from the politics of Syrinx or the Duke's reach. The people here didn't care about star metal or ancient rifts. They cared about the morning catch and the coming rains. "This is where we part ways," Clara said as they stood on a small wooden pier. "I must return to the hidden tower. There are records to be updated, and the story of this night must be hidden in the archives. The world is not ready to know how close it came to the end." "What about the Duke?" Clara asked. "He is a broken man," Clara replied. "His great excavation is a tomb of crystal. His wealth is gone, and his reputation with the king is ruined. He will spend the rest of his days in a dark cell, wondering why the stars didn't crown him." Elias turned to Julian and Clara. "The gilded lily is still hidden in the northern inlet. We can take her and head further south. There are cities where no one knows the name Oakhaven. We can start over." Julian looked at his sister, then at Elias. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, blackened piece of metal he'd scavenged from the platform. It wasn't star metal. It was just a piece of the Iron Crown's base. It was cold and inert. "I think I'd like to build something for a change," Julian said. "Not weapons. Not crowns. Maybe just plowshares and garden gates. Something that helps things grow." "And you, Elias?" Clara asked. "Will you keep traveling?" Elias looked at the silver coin in his hand, the one from the very beginning. He flipped it into the sea, watching the moon catch the metal before it vanished into the dark water. "I think I've seen enough of the world for a while," Elias said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "I think I'd like to see what happens when a traveler stays in one place long enough to see the seasons change." They watched the sun rise over the great sea, the light turning the water to gold. The hunt was over. The secrets were buried. For the first time in his life, Elias didn't feel the need to look at the stars for a map. He knew exactly where he was. The transition from a hunted fugitive to a settled citizen was perhaps the most difficult journey Elias had ever undertaken. While Julian and Clara adapted with the relief of those who had finally set down a heavy burden, Elias felt the phantom weight of his sword and the constant urge to check the perimeter of their new home. They had settled in Ethelgard, a town famous for its terraced vineyards and white stone architecture, located far enough south that the name Oakhaven was nothing more than a whisper of a cold, distant legend. Julian did not stay idle for long. Within a month, he had secured a small, abandoned stone workshop on the edge of the town square. With the help of Elias's remaining gold and some local muscle, he had rebuilt the furnace. It was not a forge for star metal or weapons of war. It was a place of heat, sweat, and honest labor. "A man needs a rhythm, Elias," Julian said one afternoon, his face streaked with soot but glowing with a peace Elias hadn't seen since the first day they met. "The hammer on the anvil. It doesn't just shape the iron. It shapes the man." Julian had become the town's most sought-after smith. He specialized in delicate ironwork, gates that looked like frozen ivy, hinges that moved with the silence of a ghost, and tools that never seemed to dull. He never spoke of the breaker or the dark mines, but his hands moved with a precision that only a master of the craft could possess. Clara, too, had found her place. She established a weaving studio overlooking the harbor. Her tapestries were unlike anything the southern merchants had seen. They depicted swirling mists, jagged sea stacks, and stars that seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light. She claimed they were scenes from her dreams, but Elias knew she was weaving their history into the silk, a silent record for those who knew how to look. As for Elias, he found himself in the unusual position of being a man of leisure. For a few weeks, he tried to learn the art of the vineyard, but his hands were built for steel, not grapes. He eventually settled into a role as the town's informal protector and mentor. He taught the local youth the basics of the blade, not to make them soldiers, but to give them the discipline and confidence he had once found in the ranks of the king's army. He spent his evenings at a small table outside Julian's workshop. He would watch the sun set over the Ethelgard hills, a glass of local cider in his hand. The paranoia was fading, replaced by a quiet vigilance. He was no longer a traveler looking for a destination. He had arrived. But as he looked at the calluses on his hands, he knew that the soldier in him wasn't dead. He was simply at rest, waiting for a peace he had finally earned. A full year had passed since the shattering of the pylon in the Valorian highlands. The seasons in Ethelgard had turned from the golden warmth of harvest to a mild, rain-swept winter, and back again to the blooming vibrance of spring. The trio, Elias, Julian, and Clara, had become a fixed part of the community, the northerners who had brought skill and a touch of mystery to the town. One evening, a messenger arrived at the gates of Ethelgard. He wore the indigo livery of a scholars' guild and carried a single, sealed scroll for the captain. He found Elias at his usual spot outside the forge. Elias broke the seal. The handwriting was elegant and familiar. It was from Clara, the Duke's fate. The letter confirmed that the Duke of Valoria had passed away in his cell, his mind lost to the whispers he had so desperately chased. The caldera, the site of the ritual, had become a place of pilgrimage for scholars of the natural world. The crystal shell remained intact, a silent sentinel over a doorway that was now permanently locked. The star metal. No new veins had been found. It appeared the Great Fall had been a singular event, and the world's supply of the ore had truly returned to the deep. She says the world is quiet, Elias said, passing the letter to Julian and Clara over dinner. The king has forgotten Oakhaven, and the governor of Syrinx has been replaced by a man of better character. Julian nodded, leaning back in his chair. Good. Let the world be quiet. We've had enough noise to last a lifetime. They sat in the warmth of the cottage, the smell of roasted lamb and fresh bread filling the air. The Iron Crown was a ghost now, a story they might one day tell to children as a cautionary tale about the hunger for power. The true star metal wasn't the glowing rock from the sky. It was the resilience they had found in each other. Elias looked at his friends. Clara was laughing at a story Julian was telling about a stubborn mule, and the light from the hearth reflected in their eyes. He realized then that his journey hadn't been about solving a mystery or saving a kingdom. It had been about finding a home for the homeless and a purpose for the lost. He stepped outside for a moment, looking up at the night sky. The stars were bright and steady, no longer pulsing with a malevolent blue light. They were just stars, distant, beautiful, and silent. He felt the silver coin in his mind's eye, the one he had thrown into the sea, and he knew it was gone forever, along with the man he used to be. Coming back inside. Elias. Clara called out from the doorway. Yes. Elias replied, a touch of wit returning to his voice. I believe there's still half a pie left, and I'd hate for Julian to accidentally finish it. He walked back into the warmth, closing the door firmly against the night. The story of the Iron Crown was finished, and the story of Ethelgard was just beginning.